Guys, this video will have two different voices, but I hope you like it. Don't forget to like and hype the video. If we reach 1,000 likes, I'll update this work as soon as more chapters come out. Without further ado, let's go to the video.
During a great battle, many monsters were slain. The protagonist, despite being wounded and exhausted, remained standing. There was still one opponent left, and all he had to do was defeat it for everything to end. This monster had stolen the world and the lives of his friends. She is the supreme queen of all monsters. She prepares to attack, as does the protagonist. The creature, charging forward, says she is sorry, but in the land where she exists, survival was not possible. A great impact is caused when their attacks collide. Now, everything depended on Arden, as the representatives of the race of apocalypse spirits, Dharma, were lifeless. The protagonist was at a disadvantage in the fight, and ended up being struck by the queen. While in the middle of the battle, he continued to remember what his friends had said, and it was the protagonist's duty, as a hero, to lead the weak. Reuben said that. He was the representative of the ancient dragon race. Arden, even wounded, prepares to counterattack. Then, he strikes, managing to hit his opponent, who quickly counters with her magic, charging directly at the protagonist, who recalls Tehran, the representative of the humans, and Redenville, the representative of the dwarves, who said that although their strength was inadequate, they believed the protagonist would avenge them. After delivering her attack, the queen causes massive destruction. Seeing that her opponent was not in front of her, she believes she has won the battle, not realizing that the protagonist was behind her, managing to attack and cut off her hand, enraging her. She quickly counters with her claws, striking the protagonist's chest and leaving him in critical condition. The representative of the mythical race, Kruger, and the representative of the ear race, Kushu, who were already down, tell Arden that the queen should know her place and not invade another world. Remembering, even wounded, he reacts by grabbing her neck, her claws still embedded in his chest. But before the protagonist could strike with his sword, the queen removes her hand from his chest and prepares to attack again. Both attack together, causing a huge impact from the applied power. Arden recalls Elena, the representative of the fairies, who had said that even if he were the only one left, he should not give up. Despite the powerful attacks, the creature remains standing, even wounded. She searches for the protagonist until she sees part of his arm on the ground, making her think she has finally defeated him. But suddenly, Arden appears, driving his sword into the creature's chest. The protagonist, who remains standing until the end, recalls his friends just before the end of his life, and, after everything is over, he says that if that's the case, he too would believe they would meet again. In the final moments, the protagonist states that he would always be waiting, and, even in regret, suffers the consequences brought by his selfishness. Besides the name for those who hunt to protect, they could be called hunters. Before all of this happened in the city, the protagonist was confused, seeing all those things, until his partner began calling him. He waves in front of him and asks what he was doing and that they should regroup. Sho says he was lost in his thoughts. Lee says that if he kept distancing himself, he would be fired, and since the battle was over, they would be heading back. The protagonist, amidst all those creatures, replies that yes, one day, monsters appeared in this world, and the hunters who awakened and gained abilities began hunting them. Sho admits that he has a truly different view compared to his past life, where he was Arden. Lee says he would leave that area to the protagonist so they could finish faster and not be disturbed by the captain. But suddenly, Komon, the captain of the Brave Guild's first assault team, appears, telling them to stop wasting time or they wouldn't get paid. The protagonist, seeing how the guy acted, states that in this world he was the lowest in the dungeon hierarchy, just a scavenger. The next day, early in the morning, Sho was running, and while training, the association wished good morning to the morning hunters and announced that they would hold an update course on hunter skills that day. The skills are a form of superpowers. When someone is able to explore their potential, they are considered an awakened hunter, although the conditions for awakening have not yet been discovered. But the protagonist has not yet awakened as a hunter, and, despite having memories of his past life, cannot use mana. His mind and body clearly remember, even though he knows how to swim, it's pointless if the water doesn't exist. And despite his situation, the reason he continued training day after day was because it was the daily ritual of his past life. He picks up a twig to test what he could do. In the hunter world, one's status determines how strong an individual will be. Therefore, even if he keeps training, it will all be in vain. The life he lived as a knight, even if he is the only one who remembers, he wished not to forget. While testing what he remembered, he breaks the twig by striking it hard against a rock. At that moment, Lee approaches and calls out to Sho, asking if he was training again. The protagonist responds that he was, and his friend says that when he sees him do this every day, he feels like he will awaken, but somehow, that never happens. Besides always having a philosophical expression on his face, Sho says it wasn't like that. While they were talking, they observe a mother scolding her daughter who wanted to do the same as the protagonist. Lee says it's better for him to train elsewhere before he gets exposed, and also takes the chance to ask if he was trying to become a hunter. The protagonist replies that he wonders if he could, since it's not something you can achieve just because you want to, even though he really wants to. His dream was to awaken and become a hunter, earning a lot of money. That was everyone's dream. An annual income in the billions, admiration from the opposite sex, being on the front lines to face the unknown, since this world adhered to the saying from the era of hunters. Lee starts messing with the protagonist's hair, saying that he would understand when he grew a bit more, that people who have something to protect always need money. He responds that he understands that and remembers the people he had to protect. They start walking, and Lee says that the schedule for the next dungeon assault will be announced the next day and hopes it won't be to any dangerous places. Sho says he hopes for the same. The next day, after the draw, the dungeon they were going to face was the Reymara Labyrinth. Everyone was surprised to hear this. Komon says he will send the details by email. Kenji calls the captain and says he heard that it was a very dangerous place, even among rank C, and that in Reymara, a different guild entered and came back battered, and that this might be too much for them, as they had only recently reached rank D. The captain gets angry and tells them to shut up and listen. He then tells them not to mix cleaners like them with hunters. Since they were being paid, they shouldn't complain and just listen to the orders, as their opinions didn't matter. And since it was time to renew their contracts, it didn't matter if they didn't want to go. They could simply leave. However, he warns that in this sector, trust is the most valuable asset, and people who leave before the end of their contract won't be hired anywhere else. Despite the argument, they head to the entrance of the Reymara Labyrinth. The hunter group is at the front. Ren asks Shinda if she didn't think something was strange. She replies that she did, and it seemed completely different from what she heard. Then she asks if she should report it to the captain. The boy replies no, since it was just a rank C dungeon, and he was sure they could handle it. Recently, the captain hadn't been in a good mood, and it was better not to bother him. Lee notices the hunters are acting strangely, and then tells the protagonist that he agrees with him, adding that it seems like they were worried about something. Suddenly, a sound echoes from the back of the cave, making the hunters worried, but Komon liked it and was ready for battle. Something begins to approach them, and soon the creatures start appearing. There were several heading toward the group. The hunters, frightened, thought this was a bit much for a start, feeling suspicious. Even so, the captain moves to attack, telling them not to hesitate and to do something if they wanted money, as although there were many of them, in the end, they were just a few insects. Komon, after being attacked by a creature, manages to defend and counterattack, taking it down. The other hunters begin to advance after seeing the captain in combat, and then they start engaging with the giant insects. Lee says that they, the scavengers, should stay in formation. Suddenly, the creatures start descending from the ceiling, spitting and causing distractions. There were a large number of them, and they were getting closer and closer. The monsters were already near the hunters, who were panicking as they didn't know what to do. An archer, using a fire arrow, shouts for everyone to fall back, then shoots at the insects, causing a large explosion. Quickly, the scavengers begin to retreat, just like the hunters. But soon, the dungeon's mid-boss appears. This was Gallus. The captain moves to attack, telling them to dodge the tail and go for the head. The monster strikes its first attack with the tail, managing to hit some hunters, even though they had been warned beforehand. Gallus begins to jump, and the captain shouts for everyone to dodge, also asking if the magic unit has arrived. When the mages arrive, they start attacking with fireballs, telling Komon to stop shouting. Even so, he tells them not to attack the shell. Along with the magical attacks, stones begin to fall on the creature, injuring it. The captain, seeing Gallus stop, says they have managed to defeat it, and orders them to collect everything, as it seemed to be worth some money. The gatherers try to cut the creature with swords, but they can't. A man who is trying to cut it panics when he sees the monster awaken, spitting acid at him, causing him to melt until nothing remains. Quickly, the captain orders everyone to retreat to avoid further losses. Lee tells everyone at the back to run to the end, as even the vapor's poison is dangerous. He didn't understand what the hunters were doing since they should have checked beforehand. The protagonist continues thinking that something was indeed wrong. Komon yells at the hunters, calling them losers, saying it's not the time to be lazy and run away from the battle. Sho realizes that he was in disbelief, just like the rest of the group, who were cornered. The captain charges into the attack, saying he would take care of this. He leaps to strike the monster's head and with just one blow, manages to cut it off. The hunters are amazed, watching the captain say it was completely different from rank C. He tells them to move, as they should check the equipment and get the injured, but suddenly something flies overhead. It's a large bird, and its scream terrifies everyone. Komon finds it impossible, as even after defeating the mid-boss, the dungeon's boss was there. Reymara was furious, and charges into the attack immediately. The captain says there is nothing more they can do, and that they should get into formation right away. Feathers begin to fall from the creature. Komon asks for the antidote to be injected quickly, as touching the feathers would mentally corrupt them. Some rookies didn't heed the leader's order, and when they were touched by the feather, they began to panic, saying they were done for. They then start running, saying there was no way to defeat something like that. Other hunters are also touched by the feathers, leading to total chaos, and they fall into despair for being there. Komon, seeing that, says this wasn't a rank C dungeon. Meanwhile, the protagonist thinks there should be something more the rearguard could do, but it's also a matter of time, as they need to escape before the boss becomes too wild. He then calls Lee, asking them to at least take the gatherers with them and escape quickly, saying they must hurry as much as possible. But the boy had been touched by the feathers, and starts saying that he didn't think a place like this hurt so much to obtain treasures and that they couldn't leave, and that everything in that place was worth money. Even a melted hunter sword with poison was worth 200 million, and on top of that, there must be other things that were even more expensive. The protagonist starts holding Lee and asks him to calm down, as he was out of his mind. Even with difficulty, Sho manages to hold him firmly, telling him he couldn't do that. But the boy resists and attacks him, saying that if he wanted to leave, he should go alone and not get in his way. The protagonist was holding the sword's blade, fighting against his own life. He asks his friend to calm down, but Lee only thinks about money, and that's making him crazier, saying that his sister was sick, and that's why he was doing this, and that he couldn't stand that he couldn't be a hunter, and that, without money, his sister was suffering a lot, but he wished for her to be happy. The protagonist calls for his friend again, and then releases the blade, which quickly falls beside his head. He tells Lee that it was okay, so he takes his hand, saying that they could leave and see his younger sister. The boy starts crying, saying he had treated him horribly. Still, Sho tells him to breathe deeply, as he was already fine. Lee begins to regain his consciousness and says that now he understood they had to leave. The protagonist confirms they should hurry, but notices that his friend was still trying. Suddenly, the boy pushes the protagonist and grips the sword tightly as if to fight. But before he could do anything, he is attacked and gravely wounded. Sho, terrified, didn't understand what had happened, and, seeing his friend, was stunned, as it seemed like he wouldn't survive. The protagonist tries to drag Lee to a safe place. Even severely wounded, the boy says he's fine until Sho hears someone asking where they were trying to go. The captain was corrupted and kept saying that the farce was over. The protagonist, seeing that the feather had touched Komon, immediately remembers Elena from his past life, and, seeing his friend on the ground, asserts that when he heard him say he had something to protect, he thought those were just idealistic words, wondering if he would act on them, or if they were just empty words. He knew that he was the best, and because of that, even though Lee lost his life to save him, if he made it meaningless, his friend was struck down in vain, unless, even so, he fought against the captain, who was laughing at seeing him with the swords. The protagonist had one thing he needed to make sure of, that the rank C hunter, Komon, would be brought down that day. Invading the dungeon had been a failure. The team had collapsed, and the hunters were all exterminated. The captain wondered why something like this had to happen when a feather touched his body, immediately changing his opinion, thinking it wasn't his fault, as he had always been right. And, seeing the gatherers nearby, he says they were to blame, and that they were the scum who hindered the hunters' movements, and that, being insects, they didn't deserve to live in the first place. For this reason, he would make sure they paid in full for the failure, and they would go to hell. He then moves into attack, striking all those in front of him. Komon, while attacking the group, says they were just useless trash, until he sees Sho sitting with Lee, and he becomes even more furious, thinking they would get them too, as they were arrogant bastards, intrusive, and like worms. He then charges again, delivering a powerful strike, hitting Lee, who stepped in front of the protagonist. The captain begins to laugh maniacally, and seeing that only Sho remained, says that he thought he would tremble and wet himself before being taken down. The protagonist stands firm, holding both swords. Komon continues saying that even the smallest insects have some spirit, and that he didn't even know what he was doing holding something like that, as there was a difference in status between them to begin with. The captain says he was a hunter and had abilities, but as for the protagonist, He had nothing. He was just a brat who hadn't even awakened yet. He then points his sword, saying he was going to start attacking his damn arrogant eyes, but he notices that Sho wasn't in front of him and gets startled to see he was behind him. Still, he quickly grabs his shield, managing to block the attack and counterattack rapidly, telling the protagonist to shut up. The captain can't land a hit. Sho says that he can move even if his opponent has lost his sanity. There's no denying that he is a hunter, and for that, he admits that he had an uncommon power. The protagonist, staring at Komon, wanted to see how far his regular training would take him, since the only thing that was difficult at that moment was Reimara enjoying the situation. Therefore, he says he should focus only on the hunt. He then moves into the fight, forcing the captain to defend. They begin to engage in combat. Komon gets close to hitting the protagonist, who manages to dodge the heavy blows, and even when he could block them, he is dragged away. Sho begins to face his opponent and admits that he was at a disadvantage, and his brain tells him to avoid the attack, but his body can't keep up, and that if he could use even 1% of his powers from the previous world, it would be great. The captain starts calling him, asking how it was possible for a gatherer like him to move that way. The protagonist breathes deeply and admits that he had wasted a lot of time trying to devise a strategy. He then prepares, and says that, as he was still asking and needed someone to teach him to breathe, Komon, about to attack, tells Sho to shut up. He then attacks again, sending a wave of blows toward the protagonist, who remains still, receiving all the damage but still in a tough situation. He prepares and counterattacks unexpectedly, landing a hit on the captain. The protagonist says that his plan was a success, but doesn't stop and thinks he should go even further. He then strikes several blows on his opponent's body, causing him to be wounded all over. Komon falls to his knees after being injured and wonders what was happening, as he was being pushed back by that bastard gatherer. This enrages him, and he says it couldn't be happening. Then, he activates his enhancement skills, super enhancement, steel will, and instant acceleration. The protagonist stands still as his opponent approaches and admits that, since he was using all his abilities, it would be difficult to follow them with his eyes. However, it's easy to understand the direction of the force, and because of this, he thinks it's a truly foolish way to use them. He then goes to meet him, stating that his path was completely visible. Watching the blade approach, Sho manages to dodge, preparing himself and landing a strike, breaking the captain's sword. After doing this, he opens his eyes and cuts Komon's leg, leaving him terrified. Seeing the protagonist approaching, the captain begins asking if he thought he was going to escape unscathed. The protagonist responds that these feathers were conveniently causing confusion among people and that he was planning to claim that he regained his sanity just before losing his life, and in any case, he had to make sure he deserved to be brought down. The captain begins to say that this was nonsense, as he was a hunter, and a loser like him hadn't even awakened yet. Still, the protagonist points his sword at the man and says that he should be brought down. He then decapitates him, throwing his head away. Sho lowers his head after finishing the fight and begins to think if he could call that annihilation, since it had been a while since he had seen so many corpses. Perhaps it was because he had been alone during the last few centuries of his previous life. Suddenly, something begins to happen to the protagonist's body, making him wonder what it was, as he felt some sort of magical power. He confirms that he was feeling this magical power just by holding the sword and deduces that he could consider himself awakened. Then, a message appears saying his level increased. Sho is impressed that he has awakened. A status window appears in front of him, showing his level is 6. His muscle strength, physical strength, speed, persistence, and endurance all had 10 points. Magic had nothing, but he also had 25 bonus points and a favorable condition. His skills were Executioner, Heretic Execution, allowing him to absorb their karma and transform it into power. The protagonist, seeing that ability, says it doesn't look good and starts remembering his friend who really desired this and lost the chance, while guys like him awakened. Suddenly, Reimara lets out a loud scream, making the protagonist worry. The monster starts flying, releasing more feathers. He says the monster was making too much noise. He then increases his magic by 1 point, stating that it was just the difference of 1 point. But between 0 magic and 1 magic, the difference was like heaven and earth. He warns that he wasn't the same as before, and that's why he could go into combat. Sho had always wondered why mana worked like this in this world, just releasing it without any control. Although they were excited about the fact that they had awakened, they didn't think twice about what was to come. Because of this, they had become vain. Reimara was about to launch an attack. The protagonist begins to concentrate, knowing that the basic use of mana was as follows: strengthen the body with delicate control and expand the flow connected to the lines. Sho positions himself and moves to attack, in search of the most efficient path. He throws his sword at the creature, which passes beside its head, further irritating it. The sword becomes embedded in the rocks due to the force it had. Raimara begins to thrash after being hit. The protagonist tells it to be quiet and advances to attack again. He jumps, managing to land on top of the monster, and before striking, he says that defeat always comes in an instant. Then he cuts off the creature's wing, driving it mad. The protagonist positions himself after the attack and begins to think that he needs to focus for one more strike, as he had to gather all the mana in his body and make that bird explode. After gaining momentum, he jumps, preparing for a high strike, catching Raimara by surprise and managing to split it in half, defeating it completely. Still enveloped in his mana, the protagonist begins to look around, seeing everything that had happened there, and starts walking, remembering the overload. The calamities brought by the queen were there to devour the Aslan world. Then, 8 races from the Aslan continent sent their representatives and worked together to face the unknown enemy, although the enemy was incomprehensibly strong. The 8 races faced it with determination, engaging in many fierce battles. In the end, after overcoming countless battles, they finally achieved victory. Suddenly, the protagonist begins to have a nightmare, where he hears a voice asking if this was what he dreamed, calling him a regrettable problem, Arden. The protagonist, startled, begins to speak, saying he was sure he had defeated him, but tells Elena to run. However, he realizes that the queen had also taken control of the girl, and asks where they would run to, as all the stars in the sky had scattered, but there was still hope. And because of that, he should remember that the consequence was entirely his due to his incompetence, and the mark of his sins would continue to burn on him, but in his next life. Suddenly, the protagonist wakes up in a hospital bed and starts breathing deeply after the nightmare. He then sits up and is surprised to find someone waiting for him, sitting next to his bed. Shin tells Sho that he had been sleeping for 3 days. The protagonist, still confused, asks who he was. The man hands him a card, telling him not to worry, as the card showed who he was. Even after hearing this, the protagonist asks what had happened to the others. Shin places the card on the bed and says that he was just, as despite being a gatherer, the first thing he thought of when he woke up was his teammates. The man explains that the Bravo Guild's first assault team was completely destroyed, everyone including Captain Komon, who was beyond saving when the medical team arrived, and that he was the only survivor. The protagonist asks about someone named Igawa. Shin says the funerals for the deceased were held at the hunter's headquarters while he was in a coma, but now he would move on to the main topic, as he was sure the protagonist must have noticed that the Raimara Labyrinth had been promoted to rank B and wanted to know his opinion about it, since a guild that had just been promoted to rank D would have found it extremely difficult, but still tried. Sho says that he really didn't have an opinion on that, but asks what exactly he wanted to know. The man says he realized that he hadn't been informed, that Komon probably hadn't mentioned it to anyone because of the huge debt he had due to his illegal gambling habits, which was why he had challenged the dungeon, despite understanding its extreme difficulty. The protagonist is enraged to learn this, but Shin continues, saying that the sudden change in the dungeon seemed to be true, and that he was still investigating the abnormal change in the dungeon. For that reason, he wanted the protagonist to contact them if he remembered anything. After the man leaves the room, Sho begins to lament, as the loss of his friends and Komon's ridiculous motivation for attacking the labyrinth was all confusing, just like his awakening. He then decides to turn on the TV to distract himself. The reporter begins announcing that it was time for the I Intend to Be a Hunter program, and now would present the guest for this episode. It was a rather prominent figure, so he hoped everyone was looking forward to it, as the guest was the rank SS hunter with the title Odin's Judgment, the best hunter in Japan, and submaster of the Curse Guild. He welcomes Aoki Sora. She was blessed with 4 abilities at the time of her awakening, which is a very rare case. He then asks her to come closer. The protagonist, while watching, says that this girl is more popular than most celebrities, and since he saw she was rank SS, he decides to look at her list of skills. Upon seeing the executioner's skill with the power to execute heretics and absorb their karma, transforming it into power, Sho assumes that heretics referred to people in general. His conclusion is based on the fact that it activated when Komon was taken down. The only problem is that it could be equivalent to a bad person, but upon researching and seeing the error, he admits it was as he thought, as it wasn't just a rare skill but a skill that only he had. Therefore he says that if there's a serial killer out there, he would love to test it. But now, it didn't matter, as the most important thing was that his rank was the lowest. While continuing his research, he remembers his past, but doesn't let it interfere with his present moment. After some time, he goes to the reception to be discharged. The receptionist tells him that everything was ready for his checkout and asks him to take care. Sho starts walking toward the door, thinking that it all made no sense. The hunters who couldn't use their abilities to the fullest, in addition to mana, he says he got nothing, as he thought all of this didn't make sense. In front of the portal, he prepares to enter and then begins walking toward it, determined in his mission. However, he was given the chance to make up for the mistakes he had made. Therefore, he wouldn't watch the same tragedy repeat in this life, and the only thing he could do at that moment was decide what his first objective would be. After crossing the portal, the protagonist was surrounded by creatures, but he was still determined to reach the top. The next day, at the hospital, in the rehabilitation room, Sakura pulls the curtain and tells the patient that it was the end of the treatment and the next person was waiting. Kimura, who was already in the room attending to a girl, explains to her that it was convenient to have a material cube for her treatment. Igawa asks if it was okay not to have a companion. The nurse asks if her relatives weren't there. The girl answers no. Kimura starts explaining what had happened during the incident when his partner, Sakura, starts laughing and says she would take over from there. After his partner leaves, she apologizes to Igawa for what happened. The girl says it's fine and thanks her. The nurse approaches and says that maybe Igawa should have already heard what happened to her brother. But before she finishes speaking, the girl says she wanted something sweet. Mana allergy. The portals that began appearing 50 years ago spread mana into the atmosphere, and a new disease gradually appeared, making people lose their vitality and eventually leading to death. It is specified as an incurable disease, and so far, no one has fully recovered. And currently, even in a hospital, they can only suppress the symptoms with a material cube. But still, it is convenient to have a material cube for her treatment. Igawa was a bit confused about the treatment, but got distracted when she heard on the TV that last week's broadcast had been a huge internet sensation, featuring Japan's #1 hunter, Aoki, who had great electrical abilities. The reporters said that no matter how many times they watched the video, the power was shockingly strong, and it seemed that the viewership for this scene skyrocketed. Igawa was impressed as well, watching that, until she was startled by a boy shouting behind her, saying that Sora was amazing, and that the lighting was all crackling, and that if he ever awakened fully, he would join the Curse Guild. The girl, hearing this, thought that he had a few years before becoming a hunter, but still, she heard him ask if she thought Aoki was amazing, since he had heard she had 4 abilities, and so he wanted to know her opinion on the #1. Smiling, Igawa replies yes, but soon the nurse appears to pick up the boy who was leaving his room. After the unexpected conversation, the girl goes to get a soda and starts thinking that Aoki was the same age as her and was already the best hunter in Japan, and that she was completely different, as she still hadn't even managed to adapt to this new world. She then states that since her parents passed away due to the anomaly in the fissure, her brother had been supporting her, but since her body was like this, she was becoming a burden, so she starts crying, wishing she could see her brother. Unexpectedly, a nurse approaches and cheers with another, saying the girl would stand out if she cried in a place like this. Seeing how Sakura was smiling, it calms her down. The nurse tells her to smile when going through difficult moments, as she was sure her brother wanted the same. Also, she was sure her brother thought the same and had prepared a gift for her somewhere. Igawa thanks her for the words, but soon she gets startled when the nurse looks toward the window, worried. They realize that something was wrong with the moon, as it was a lighter color than usual. Some people in the hospital, seeing this, start shouting for everyone to flee. Both are confused by this, as people were shouting for everyone to go to the shelters, as there was an anomaly in the fissure. A man says he just received news from the Hunter Association, and they needed to move before it expanded. Sakura says it seemed strange to be an anomaly, as it didn't look like there were any monsters. The man continues shouting for everyone to run to Building B, but Igawa was paralyzed in that situation. Then suddenly, a monster attacks the hospital, leaving the girl terrified as the strike passes by her back. She's stunned by this, as is the nurse. Now the creature was inside the hospital, close to them, and they didn't know what to do. Igawa couldn't stop shaking, even knowing she needed to escape. But seeing the creature, she says her legs were frozen. Sakura grabs the girl by the waist and tells her to prepare, as they needed to get to the lobby, because since the association knew about the situation, hunters should arrive soon. She then throws Igawa to the side, saying she would buy some time, but the girl didn't want to let the nurse do that for her. Kimura enters in despair, seeing the scene, but his colleague holds her back, saying there was no way to save them. As Igawa fell, she wondered if anything would change if she had power too, not realizing that the protagonist was approaching. When he arrived, he quickly defeated the monster, telling her that she looked like her brother. He then asked her to think about the people she was leaving behind. Still scared, Igawa asked who he was. The protagonist, before answering, asked her name. He told her he was there to represent Lee. He then introduced himself, saying his name, and mentioned that her brother was his benefactor, which moved her, making her remember him. Finally, Sho found the girl who had been wondering what her brother had left in the Dortalemia desert dungeons. Hunter Aoki, submaster of the Curse Guild, was in combat against a giant centipede. Using her spear, she attacked, landing several blows that caused some damage to the creature, which, despite that, continued fighting. Aoki prepared to strike again, delivering an even more powerful attack. The other hunters, witnessing this, were impressed, as the power was enormous, cutting the centipede into several pieces. Kaido told Ebara that it was audacious to get so close to Sora. The girl replied that she had seen someone have their phone broken in half for getting too close. The knight said that Sora had many admirers, as she was number 1 and the only rank SS hunter in Japan. She was focused, surrounded by several monsters. Even so, she began to laugh, finding the situation fun. Kaido, seeing how she was fighting, said that Aoki was very interested in her work that day, but he noticed something strange. The dungeon boss from Dortalemia appeared faster than usual, already using his powers. Quickly, he grabbed his weapon and said it was time for them to start working, but he heard Sora saying that she would take care of it. Watching the girl fight, he said he didn't mind doing nothing, and even though the situation was tough, he told her to have fun. Aoki, using electricity, delivered a powerful attack against the dungeon boss, forcing it to retreat. But quickly, the girl repositioned herself, and still using her electrical power, drove her spear into the ground, saying there was no point in running, as she would catch him. The attack hit all the holes the Dortalemia dungeon had made. Kaido told Ebara that Sora was truly extraordinary. The priestess responded that, seeing that battle, she was sure Aoki was taking everything out on the boss, as it didn't take long for the dungeon to be cleared. After the fight, the knight thanked Aoki and asked if she was going back. Before she could respond, Ibara said that maybe the number 1 was listening to their conversation, which was why she hadn't answered. But suddenly, an eye appeared in the sky, and they said they would talk another time, as everything was different. Sora prepared again for the battle, as she deduced that this was the dungeon's core. Ebara asked if the core shouldn't be deeper inside. Kaido said that changes always appear without warning. Quickly, she aimed her rifle at the fissure and fired, using mana. The shot was going at full speed until it began to lose momentum, as the effective shooting distance was 4.5 kilometers, with a maximum range of 7 kilometers, while the target was 12 kilometers away. Sora asked what the distance to the target was. Kaido said it was about 12 kilometers, and a half-hearted shot would be too weak for that, and no matter the attack power, she normally wouldn't be able to hit a target that far. The number 1 thought it was better for them to change locations, as the fissure anomaly would happen soon. The marksman said she was right. They were at the edge of a cliff, and Kaito told Ebara that the dimensional portal had opened, and he thought the fissure anomaly had begun, so there was no time to hesitate. As they descended the cliff, Aoki said she had already contacted the guild and that the two of them should focus on the rescue operation. The marksman asked what she planned to do. Sora replied that, obviously, she was going to bring down the moon. Meanwhile, members of the association were giving interviews, stating that it was an anomaly in the fissure with a rank S threat level, and that the anomaly usually starts in dungeons. They also said that the fissure anomaly has a higher rank than the dungeon it originated from. Judging by the scale of the anomaly, it must have come from a dungeon at least rank A. The moon, which was above the heart of the capital, was the core of the fissure anomaly, and the guardians who would protect the core had yet to be seen. Sho was observing everything that was happening from the outside. He was looking out the window while waiting for Igawa, who upon seeing him, asked if it had only been a mana allergy. The girl responded that she was fine, but wanted to know if he was a gatherer who worked with her brother. The protagonist answered yes. Igawa asked what her brother had said about her, whether it was things like being a burden he carried. The protagonist said that Lee didn't lose his life because of her, and although it was hard to believe, she should accept his sense of obligation and use it as her motivation, and one day, she would overcome it. However, she should remember that Lee was always thinking about her, and that she should never forget that. The girl started crying as she listened to the protagonist. Embarrassed by the situation, she said she would continue talking with him later, wanting to exterminate that thing. The city was in complete chaos, burning with monsters coming from everywhere and attacking humans. The protagonist ran at full speed toward the focus of the monsters, and upon encountering the first one, he easily defeated it. During those days, he had concluded that, after defeating several monsters, there was no reason to increase any other statistics besides mana, and that if he increased his strength and agility, the changes would quickly appear and reach their peak at a low ceiling. Upon hearing this, the guildmaster said that, in short, The protagonist wanted to test the effectiveness of strength statistics, and after having an arm wrestling match with a hunter who had 11 more points in statistics, he clearly understood the difference. Facing several creatures, Sho said he didn't have time to waste. He dodged the creature's attack, and stepping on its back, propelled himself to jump to the top of the building. Midway, he increased 99 points in mana, bringing his total to 30. Reaching the top, he gained more momentum to get as close as possible to the moon. He was enjoying this feeling. The protagonist prepared to attack, concentrating all his mana into his arm, sending it to his hand, and launching the sword toward the moon. Sho hoped the attack would reach its target, but after it hit the ground, he noticed it didn't work as he had imagined because his level wasn't high enough, and so he had to try something different. Then he noticed an explosion near where he was. Sora was activating her abilities: lightning, thunderstorm burst, and lightning rain. She combined these 3 attacks, creating a powerful lightning tornado controlled by her spear. She launched the attack toward the moon, causing a huge impact. Aoki, watching how the attack was going, realized it was working, until she noticed there was another core. This meant that the moon was the guardian, and she counterattacked by launching an enormous energy ball. Sora began to stop the attack using her spear but started being pushed back. The protagonist had just arrived to see this up close and noticed that the girl was struggling. He decided to help her, supporting her back, as he had high expectations for her, since they said she was rank SS. He asked her to focus, as many lives depended on her. Sora asked who he was, and told him to stay away. The protagonist, watching the battle, hadn't expected the girl to disperse all that mana, and with his hand still on her back, he asked her to circulate the mana while he guided her. Aoki immediately noticed that the protagonist had changed the flow of mana and strength, but deduced that there was time, and she should just try. Then she realized her mana had stabilized, and it seemed to even be overflowing, but she didn't understand how she still had that mana after using it all. But soon, she changed her thinking, deciding she shouldn't worry about it. She then told the protagonist that he had a peculiar ability, and now she understood why they were on the same side and that they were going to destroy this thing. Sora prepared another attack and launched her electric tornado again toward the moon, but this time, much more powerful than the first. The attack caused significant damage. The girl was exhausted, unable to believe she had done that. The protagonist, looking up, said that it wasn't over yet. Aoki was surprised to hear that. Sho said that the core was still alive and seemed quite resilient. He then asked if she could try again. Kneeling down, the girl said it was impossible, as she was at her limit, and as frustrating as it was, they had no choice but to wait for reinforcements. The protagonist, confident, said that maybe he could handle it. He then climbed onto her spear, leaving Sora confused. Sho said that she was still the best hunter in Japan and certainly had the strength to make one person fly. The girl stood up and asked if he was talking about himself. The protagonist says he doesn't have time to explain, but tells her to do the same as the attack she just used. Aoki tells the protagonist that he's a strange guy and wouldn't mind if things ended badly, then throws him toward the moon. The protagonist was heading at full speed, with a plan in mind, as he thought he had enough strength if he could get close. So, he adds 5 more points of mana, bringing his total to 35. Now they were at a much shorter distance than before. He releases his sword and kicks it, making it go faster. The blade was so fast that it broke the sound barrier, hitting the center of the core with a loud crash, and soon it was completely destroyed. Sora was stunned seeing that and admitted it was crazy. The core was entirely destroyed. As the protagonist fell, he received messages saying he leveled up and gained a new skill. Even while still falling, he thought it was perfect and began to think about what he would do in this situation. He tried to turn around and ended up landing on top of a building. Aoki, seeing this, couldn't believe that guy had corrected his mana flow and smashed the guardian of the anomaly. She started to think that there were other rank SS hunters besides her. The next day, journalists were talking about the fissure, which was of an extremely rare type, ranked S. But it was all thanks to Aoki that the casualties were kept as low as possible. The girl, giving an interview, said that in fact another hunter had helped. However, he disappeared as soon as it was over, so there was no way to know who he was, but she would love to meet him again if she had the chance. Igawa was watching the interview with the protagonist, and she asked if that hunter was him. Sho tried to change the subject, asking if she was in pain. The girl said she had been a little worried when she was hospitalized, but was feeling better now. The protagonist began thinking that the girl shouldn't bring this up, but she soon asked if he wasn't a gatherer. Sho replied that no, as he had just awakened recently. The girl asked if he would be a hunter. The protagonist replied that he didn't know, since he had a hunter exam and other things. She began thinking for a moment and said that he should absolutely accept it. The protagonist said that his level was still too low. Still, Igawa said she would cheer for him, and that he would be a wonderful hunter. The protagonist stood up and said she was right, as nothing compared to having status, and the hunter exam was fine to try. A few days later, he was at the hunter exam field in a rank F dungeon, the Nadia Tropical Forest. Kale was broadcasting, saying that this was the Hunter's channel, where they bring insights into the secrets of being a hunter, and they would be streaming the 588th Hunter exam live from the exam site. The boy approached a hunter and asked if he could talk to him for a moment. Yabuki said yes, as he was going to be a rank SSS hunter, since Aoki awakened with 4 abilities, while he had awakened with 3. Kale said he seemed very confident, so he wanted to know what rank he aimed for. The long-haired boy said he was going for first place. The protagonist, who was nearby, thought that this guy was probably rank A at best, but soon realized the exam was about to begin, and the supervisor would be the invited Aoki, who began introducing herself, saying she hoped everyone would be able to show their abilities to the fullest. The participants went wild seeing her and wanted to get closer to confirm if she was real. At this moment, the protagonist realized she wasn't usually invited and thought it would be problematic to get involved, so he wanted to escape as quickly as possible, and the best thing to do was avoid anything that would attract attention. The rookies started to crowd, wanting to talk to the girl, even asking for silence. She began remembering the conversation she had with the head of the Curse Guild, who wanted her to be the guest at the exam. Sora wanted to know why he explained that the fissure anomaly, which had destroyed things, originated from the Dordolemia Desert Dungeon. Uhara kept talking and wanted to know why it was their guild attacking the dungeon while this was happening, and the audience thought it was a show, but she said that was ridiculous. The guildmaster agreed with her, but said it wasn't something they could ignore, and apparently, the president of the Japanese Hunter Association would be there, so she had to appear to calm the situation down, and, if she found any promising rookie, take them to the guild. The association apologized for the delay, but the exam was about to start. There were several drones flying over the area, and reporters at the site witnessing the start of the exam. The protagonist knows that the mission is to stay alive for 24 hours. As he climbs a tree, he realizes that the others seem to be following the program, and that it was easy to understand, but very boring, until he notices mana approaching. This catches his attention, as it was a spell, and even though it was weak, it was obvious that it was someone from his past, meaning there could be more reincarnated individuals besides him. Kenzu, the president of the Hunter Association, wonders who the main candidate would be this time. Aoki says it might be Yabuki, as he had 3 abilities from his awakening, but the president mentions that the number of abilities might not be that important. The girl then asks if he has a different opinion. He says that the younger generation seems to have forgotten that the person who stopped the anomaly in the first fissure in Japan was a hunter below rank S. Hearing this, Sora admits she can't argue, but asks who Kenzu thinks will be the winner. He says that number 241 seems to have potential, as he didn't waste a minute. Quickly, the girl starts looking for this newly awakened person. It doesn't take long for her to find the protagonist's profile. The president says that this candidate is 20 years old, and despite being young, he's very calm, and he seems like Kenzu when he was active in the field. Aoki, seeing that it was the person she was looking for, is fascinated, especially after learning that the protagonist had just awakened. He was up in a tree, hearing Yabuki tell Kishida that he had always been a chatterbox since high school, and that he could tell how valuable his grandfather was. The boy gets irritated and, concentrating his mana, says that he was sure he had already told him not to talk trash about his grandfather. Yabuki, along with his lackeys, starts laughing and asks if the boy wants to fight him since he's a loser with only 1 ability. The protagonist decides to intervene in the fight. The long-haired guy asks what his problem is and doesn't know who the hell he is, but if he didn't want to get involved, he suggested he move out of the way. Sho says he'll do as suggested since he's met many troublesome people recently and really hates these kinds of situations. He then grabs Kishida by the waist and starts running, saying he'll take him with him. Yabuki tells his lackeys to chase them down and not let them get away. But when they get close, the protagonist kicks one of them, throwing him onto another. Kishida, confused, asks who he is. Sho asks the boy if he understands the terms Aslan, Ideya, and Overload. He replies that he doesn't understand anything. The protagonist asks him to be honest, as the mana enchantment he was using was racial, and he wants to know who taught him to do that. Kishida, surprised, asks how he knew about his ability, as it seemed like the protagonist knew something. Immediately, the protagonist stops running and starts talking to the boy, who says he awakened to the ability his grandfather taught him and wanted to know if there was a problem. Sho says there is a big problem, especially since he didn't think racial would become an ability. It could be the key to his connection with his past life. But regardless of that, he tells Kishida that he would be a good assistant, but the boy responds that he didn't want to be an assistant. The protagonist asks how old he is. The boy says he's 19 and a first-year university student. Sho introduces himself again and confirms once more if his grandfather had taught him about racial. Then he starts thinking and asks if he had a different name, like Ruben or Robert. Kishida was stunned hearing that and says his grandfather was pure Japanese. The protagonist, seeing these reactions, affirms that the boy wasn't connected to his past life and that things couldn't happen so easily. But he asks if he was involved with those guys. The boy says that Yabuki is his schoolmate, and after awakening, he always harassed people around him, and since he couldn't match him in ability, he didn't take him seriously. Sho asks if the number of abilities is that important. Kishida says that the more abilities one has, the higher their rank will be. Hearing this, the protagonist delivers a strike and splits a large stone that was behind him in half. He then says that he used mana to do this and not his ability. The boy is impressed seeing this and begs him to teach him how to do it, as he couldn't forgive a powerful human like Yabuki. The protagonist says he trains, but there's a condition, so he asks him to sit down. After a while, they return to where Yabuki's group was, and upon seeing them, Yabuki says he didn't expect them to come back and sees that he wanted to be defeated before the final exam. The protagonist tells the boy to go. This is his fight, and he won't interfere. Kishida starts concentrating his mana and says not to worry. The long-haired guy starts getting scared seeing that and noticing that it was different from before. But regardless of that, he thought that he was just a loser with only one ability, and that he could beat him even with his eyes closed. And it was obvious how this would end, as it was just a waste of time. Kishida tells Yabuki that he hasn't changed at all since high school and is still a punk. This makes the long-haired guy so irritated that he starts using his abilities, saying he could do whatever he wanted. The knight charges at him, telling him at least not to cause trouble for people who aren't involved. Yabuki creates a shield and blocks the attack from his opponent. He tells the boy not to laugh, shut up, and let himself be hit. Kishida knows that if that mana wall is hit by a physical impact, his mana explosion ability will be triggered. But he admits that the heat was intense, and it felt like his mana might melt. He then remembers the training where the protagonist had said he had a habit of keeping his distance, but he should avoid that in a duel, especially since they would use their racial abilities correctly with the spear. In the middle of the fight, the boy realizes everything was going as Sho had said, and then states that he only had one chance. So he uses everything he learned about not relying only on mana, but covering it, and concentrating everything into a single point. This causes his ability to level up from C to B rank. Kishida starts using all his strength, even with the heat. The shield Yabuki created begins to crack and increases with every hit until it shatters completely, leaving him surprised. Quickly, the boy strikes his spear into the long-haired guy's stomach, pushing him away. He thought it was impossible for that to have happened, but before doing anything, Kishida attacks again with his spear, knocking him face first onto the ground. Seeing his opponent on the floor, he takes a deep breath, not believing he managed to win, as he didn't expect to defeat the chatterbox before he could use his ability. The boy begins to thank the protagonist for the help. He was sitting after having beaten Yabuki's 2 henchmen and says that this was good. Kishida kneels and asks what they would do with the material cubes that the guy had. The protagonist says they would split them equally. After dividing them, Sho begins to walk. But then the boy asks why he had about 20% of the cubes. The protagonist says he had mentioned it before the training started, but he would take half of his net profit to pay for the lessons. Kishida asks if he was serious back then. The protagonist says he had spoken about his lessons and teachings, which weren't bad, and that the exam should be over soon. He then asks if the boy wanted to hunt to pass the time, but he responds that if that was possible, he would have done it a long time ago, but the only one who could probably do that in the remaining 12 minutes was the protagonist. Hearing this, Sho says it doesn't matter. He then takes down his phone number and warns him that when he contacts him, it's better to fly over. Also, he should keep the agreement a secret. The boy says he understands. After the conversation, Sho says he's going to say goodbye. The young knight asks him to wait, as there were still some procedures to be done. But the protagonist keeps walking toward the portal, saying that those were things for the people who manage it to handle. Kishida thanks him for saving him, while saying goodbye. Sho passed the exam, and that's why the portal appeared for him. The protagonist begins to think there might be more people like Yabuki out there, and he was right. To gather more people, he needs to create a new guild, so he decides to rank up as quickly as possible. Aoki was disguised at the portal exit, aiming to find the protagonist, who tells the girl she's got the wrong person, but then asks her to stop walking because he hadn't said anything. There were personal things he wanted to talk about, especially since he hadn't thought he would be the first one to pass without going through the formalities and just disappear like that. Moreover, he had left through the emergency portal in the middle of the city and wanted to talk just a little bit. They head to the Hunter's Mall. The protagonist buys a combat jacket, And Aoki, seeing the item, says it suits him since she is the speed expert during combat. Then she shows him other items on a table, including recovery and resistance items, along with pants and a belt, and she also needed a bag to store the items. Sho, looking at those items, says it's as expected from an SS rank. Each one of them is top quality, but he says he doesn't know what she's trying to do, though he knows that his feelings won't change because she's doing that. The girl says he doesn't need to worry about it, especially since, in terms of hunter career, she's above him, and it's not uncommon for something to suddenly happen in a dungeon. As they say, luck favors the prepared mind. Furthermore, that money was a reward for helping suppress the anomaly, and he didn't need to think of it as a favor. The protagonist says that there's no need to hold back, until he realizes that they were selling materials there, but the girl says that the materials need to be handled by specialists. While carrying the bags, the protagonist thinks that this should be enough to make something similar to the soul pill. Sora, seeing the cost of those materials, is stunned, and after a while, Sho asks why she's quiet. The girl says it was just his imagination, but in reality, she was shocked by the cost of the materials. She then says she would get to the main point and make her formal proposal. She wants to know if he'd like to join the Curse Guild, promising that he would receive the same treatment as she does. The protagonist refuses without much thought. Aoki says he didn't have to refuse so openly, and that he should at least give a reason. The protagonist, who really didn't have a reason and didn't like being under someone else's command, hears the girl say she understands and would change her request. The girl asks that, from his hands, she could feel the sensation of that time again, but Sho asks why she was going so far, as she was the best hunter in Japan. Sora says she wanted to aim for even higher heights. The more people expect from her, the more results she needs to show, and that's why she needed to be much stronger. The protagonist, hearing this, says he understands and agrees, as he's curious to see what the number one in Japan would be like. The next day, they go to the academy. Aoki's place was the quietest in that area. Sho notices that she changed her weapon. The girl says the other one was destroyed the day they took down the moon, and warns that she would try her best not to use mana, but the protagonist disagrees and says she should use whatever she wanted, activating her electric abilities. The girl asks him to prepare himself, then charges for an attack, which is blocked by the protagonist, who counters with a kick, pushing her back and getting ready, knowing he wasn't very good at controlling mana, so he was separating it and turning it into a battle of brute force, which was becoming more and more interesting. The girl quickly recovers and jumps for an overhead attack, but the protagonist easily dodges. Suddenly, Aoki's spear starts spinning, delivering another quick strike, forcing Sho to retreat, but soon after, he positions himself for a counterattack, surprising her with a direct strike using his sword, landing a hit on her chest. But the protagonist notices something that surprises him. The mana density where the tip of his sword landed wasn't allowing it to penetrate. Quickly, Sora takes his sword, saying she couldn't believe he was rank F. The protagonist replies that, yes, on paper he was, but now he had a clear image of it. So he drops his sword, deducing that this wouldn't end so soon. The number one in Japan asks if he's surrendering. Sho replies that he's not. It's just that when he uses a sword, he can't retreat, but asks her not to think badly of him. His mana, which was at 35, he makes it rise to 70, meaning he was just acknowledging his opponent. Quickly, the protagonist charges for an attack, and seeing the girl preparing, he deduces she wouldn't let him reduce the distance so easily, but wonders if there's a way. Then, he grabs a lightning bolt Aoki releases, surprising her as she wonders how he caught lightning with his hands and asks him what nonsense that was. He was moving according to the lightning. Managing to get behind Sora quickly and surprising her, Sho admits that the technique she had taught him in his previous life would be necessary to use. He then touches the girl's back, not believing he was doing that. This ability is called Permeating Palm. By using mana, it can cause a significant impact. Aoki starts remembering when she was in front of several members of the association who wanted to know if she would represent Japan in the future, as she had awakened with 4 abilities and, apparently, had contributed greatly during the last anomaly in the fissure, so they wanted to raise her to rank S and were looking forward to her future feats. She thanks them, saying it's expected, as it's her duty. After the meeting, when she leaves the building, a subordinate is waiting, and he says it's already been 3 days since she started taking missions, and maybe it would be better to take a day off to rest at home. Aoki says he's right. She should stay home. Goku is surprised that his boss agreed, as she hardly ever rests. He then notices a group of teenagers nearby mocking a girl. Seeing it, he remembers when he was younger, going through the same situation. Goku, noticing that she was frozen, asks if something is wrong. Sora turns around and starts walking toward the car, saying that nothing is wrong. She then asks him to take her to the anomaly in the fissure. Back at the fight with the protagonist, she gets up and asks if she lost. He replies that yes. The girl says she expected that, but she had exceeded his expectations. And feeling embarrassed, Sho says that it's expected since she does everything by herself. Annoyed, Aoki says she didn't ask for anyone's lecture and thinks it's too much pressure to carry the country on her shoulders. The protagonist, after hearing that, says that it was obvious, but wasn't it her who decided to take all of that on? Sora starts to cry. Sho continues, saying that she didn't need to rush things, since no matter how much she pushes, things will end up the same, but he didn't want to be misunderstood, as he supported her activities. The girl then says that, in that case, she wanted to learn his secret to strength. The protagonist extends his hand, saying he would teach her. On that same day, Kishida was in combat. He was fighting a goblin, using a shield to block the attacks and counterattacking with his spear, striking the creature's chest and knocking it to the ground. After finishing the fight, he says he cleared the area. The protagonist says everything is fine, and continues taking pictures for the Saitama municipality of that rank E dungeon. Kishida says that the target shield he received from Sho fit him very well. The protagonist says that's great, as he would be a sub-tank. The boy, surprised, says that it seems a little sudden. Sho says he's giving him the role based on his skills, so he shouldn't complain. He then gets excited and says that as a tank, he would go first. The protagonist admits he's happy that the guy has real talent, and now that he had resolved the incident with Aoki, it was time to focus and rank up to C. And so he thinks that, from here on, he could try to gather information about his past life, but suddenly hears a noise coming from the direction the boy had gone. When he gets closer, he asks what's going on. Kishida is stunned, pointing to a person's corpse. The protagonist approaches and says that maybe it was a tank, and not long ago it lost its life, as even though tiny, he could still feel the mana. They then start following that path together, until they find several lifeless bodies. Sho, seeing this, says it was to be expected. The Lancer asks if this was some kind of powerful monster. The protagonist doubts it's the work of a monster, as it's easy to see the order in which they were taken out: tank, attacker, and healer, the direction in which they lost their lives. Sho gets closer, and notices they were taking out the most troublesome one first, the healer, before moving on to the attacker and tank. And this wasn't something one would expect from a rank E dungeon monster. He thinks this must be the work of another hunter. Kishida is surprised. The protagonist continues, saying that given the situation, the boss's room should be ahead. When they arrive, seeing everything there, they realize the place really seemed inhabited. The Lancer says it looks more like a hideout. The protagonist says they had even committed murders and were probably very bad people. Looking at the whole environment, he notices the group fled after exposing their hideout, as the mana left behind was still very prominent. Shocked, Kishida says he couldn't believe they were in the dungeon they were in, shouting, and how unlucky that was. The protagonist asks what he means by bad luck, as he thinks almost no one is as lucky as they are. He then activates his executioner ability, since now it was finally the right moment to test it. After leaving the dungeon, they notify the authorities, who start retrieving the bodies. Tamura, the leader of the post-disposal team, upon finding the protagonist, says it's been a while since they've seen each other, and that he didn't expect to run into him like this again. Also, it seems he had awakened too. Sho wonders what the post-disposal team is. He then asks if he could tell just by looking into his eyes. Tamura laughs and says that's part of his job, and since the protagonist was a first-hand witness, he should discuss the matter with the responsible people, as he had another matter to take care of. He then says he'll leave the rest to the major, who approaches, thanking for the smooth delivery. She asks if those were the first witnesses. When confirmed, she introduces herself as Tachibara, from the Hunter Control Unit. She asks if it was just a two-person team. Sho replies yes. The major wanted to know if they had noticed anything suspicious or strange. They responded that they had never witnessed anything like that before. Tachibara says that this is certainly not an incident that should happen in a rank E dungeon, and she remembers when she was a hunter. She then hands her business card to the protagonist, since they would continue hunting. Shu thanks her for the invitation and, looking at the card, says he had seen that symbol before when he was a gatherer for the Hunter Control Unit. He starts to wonder if the incident was serious enough that even the military intervened. The major says her goodbyes and tells them that if they remember anything else, they should contact her. They reply that they understand. The protagonist, watching Tachibara leave, thinks that hunters hunting other hunters is strange, and there was almost no mana leakage, deducing that it must be skilled hunters operating in the shadows, so it would be better to hurry up. He then starts running. Kishida asks if they weren't going to finish things. The protagonist tells him to rest a bit that day, and heads to Omiya. There, he follows the mana trail through the city, He arrives in front of a large motel and finds it interesting that the person was hiding in a crowded place. Upon entering, he heads to the room with more of that mana, wondering if someone would be there. As he approaches the door, he hears a noise from inside. He starts sliding his sword into the side of the door, managing to break it open. Upon entering the room, the protagonist realizes that the person jumped out of the window to escape. He runs to see if he can recognize them and notices they are heading up the building. He decides to follow, jumping through the window. He begins to climb the building, following that person. When he gets close, he corners them. The man asks who the protagonist is and if he's from the association or the military. He replies that if he surrenders, it might make things easier for him. Yuto says that, apparently, a hero has arrived, and that unfortunately, he has no such intentions, but starts drawing his sword and gets into combat position, saying that all he needs to do is get rid of him. The protagonist starts facing the guy, who laughs, asking if he could see him and saying he would take him out with a single strike. But Sho manages to dodge the attack, quickly counterattacking with a kick to Yuto's leg, knocking him to the ground and immobilizing him. The protagonist says he has a lot of questions and wants to know why he was living in the dungeon, as well as his name, age, and allies. Yuto asks what's with Sho, wondering if he's related to the guy who was taken out, as they were all idiots and had just gotten rid of a few pests, and there's nothing wrong with that. Anyway, he could only take them to justice through the law, so it's better to stop acting like a blackmailer and arrest him if he wants to know. The protagonist asks if he thinks he's just making empty threats and that they could just keep doing what they were doing. He then starts lifting him by the shoulder, saying he shouldn't think he could leave alive, and wouldn't judge him by the law or anything like that. But he throws him to the ground with all his strength, making his level increase, surprising him by leveling up just from defeating this guy. He also gains a new ability, Super Enhancement. The karma of heretics becomes the protagonist's power, and now he understands he needs to examine this a bit more closely. He realizes that the term heretics in the executioner ability refers to common criminals or people who used hunter power for evil. But either way, it's a great way to level up, and it's clear that the system is helping him, as he should get rid of the heretics. The protagonist notices the criminal's phone is ringing, so he picks it up. Maki immediately starts talking about how the control unit sniffed him out, but with no response, says at least he should answer the phone properly since X-Day was coming and he shouldn't be caught. The protagonist starts laughing, and Maki asks who's speaking. Sho says they are a newly formed group, consisting of weaklings, and asks what he's plotting by involving those criminals. The bandit tells the protagonist that if he values his life, he should shut up, but Sho responds that he's right about the money and now wants to know when X-Day is. The man starts insulting him. Sho then throws the phone on the ground and breaks it. He picks up the business card from the major of the Hunter Control Unit and thinks he should thank the government staff for this information. Meanwhile, in the special prison, Tachibura decides to enter in order to meet a man, knowing it was due to the matter-blocking inhibitor that suppresses hunters' abilities. Rank A and below hunters lose their abilities simply by being imprisoned, and Rank S hunters can no longer use more than half of their powers. Her assistant asks who she wanted to meet in such a place. The major replies that he also knew the man. Mark wonders how she knew a criminal who was locked up in such a place. Tachibura, now with Wei, throws 2 photos on the table and says that the man who used to be his subordinate started making moves, and the crimes were increasing. The man asks if she was suggesting that he was controlling things behind the scenes. Enraged, the major slams her hand on the table and says that this time, she would make sure he couldn't move an inch, and something like the assassination attempt on the Prime Minister 8 years ago wouldn't happen again. Wei starts laughing and asks if she's ever felt the sense of duty. Tachibura says he's talking nonsense again, but the criminal replies that the current state, where incompetent people wearing the mantle of the law were above them, was why he decided, 8 years ago, that he wanted to bury them and make an example of them. However, he laments the tragedies that would occur during the process, remembering that her father was an excellent hunter, but as he could see, he was completely contained in a room where the effects of the matter-blocking inhibitor were strongest, and asks if she was trying to impress him even in his helpless state. Tachibura pulls the chain and says he was sitting in silence on that prison island and she wouldn't let him do whatever he wanted. The major explains to her assistant that 8 years ago, 35 hunters gathered to subjugate Wei when he tried to assassinate the Prime Minister, and one of them was her father. Lang is shocked to hear this. The girl continues, saying that in the end, Tsuchika's reckless actions were thwarted by the current president Wakama. However, the sacrifice was inevitable, but that's all in the past, and they shouldn't worry about it, and should get back to work. Looking at the news, she notices rapid developments, and the guy who had been caught was the one who had come out of the dungeon the previous day. Now, In the rank D dungeon, the loam mine, Kishida asks the protagonist if he was going to receive materials instead of money for a while. He replies that he didn't know about that and had only said he would receive materials. The boy asks why not sell the material cube and use the money he makes. Sho says that even in the shop, there were many things he couldn't buy, but not to worry about it. Suddenly, a monster breaks through a wall and charges toward them. Kishida quickly reacts with his spear, landing a strike on the creature, which still wasn't defeated and was about to attack him. But the protagonist quickly acts and strikes the creature, splitting it in half. However, when they realize it, they are surrounded by monsters. The boy asks, by the way, why they needed the materials. Sho says he doesn't need them and will explain later. Kishida starts attacking the monster, just as the protagonist begins cutting them down, easily dispatching them. After defeating those creatures, the boss of the loam mine starts approaching. Alarmed, Kishida says that the monster is huge, but the protagonist says it's a good moment, leaving him surprised, as Sho charges toward the attack with the intent to get some good materials. The monster tries to attack him, but the protagonist is faster and begins climbing its arm, heading for a direct attack on the head, plunging his sword into the most vulnerable part and then delivering several strikes, cutting the dungeon boss into pieces. After everything is finished, Kishida says he really can't compete with the protagonist, who replies that, in fact, it would be problematic if he wanted to compete with him. The boy says that was his way of expressing himself, and he was starting to understand that, knowing perfectly well that he was seeking praise. That afternoon, the protagonist in his room was trying to create something. He was using the secret technique of the fairy tribe to unlock latent abilities. He spent the entire night trying to create a soul pill using the materials Aoki had bought, and the reason for clearing the dungeon with Kishida was to collect the materials for the soul pill. However, he kept failing every time. Sometimes it was incomplete, deformed, unrecognizable, or failed. By now, it was night, and the clay core was his last attempt, and he was praying that it wouldn't fail this time. He then starts again using the skill, managing to develop it to the end, surprised by the result, as he successfully created a soul pill that absorbs the power of the ore. The quality of the effect was increased resistance, with 1 pill taken per day. He considered it a success, as it could enhance other stats besides his mana. His resistance, which was 10, went up to 11. Sho starts to think that, thanks to this, he didn't need to rely solely on the executioner. He turns on the TV, where they're talking about an unidentified body found dumped at an intersection last night, and the police were investigating the case, which took place in the Fukui prefecture. The protagonist, seeing the news, finds it quite sudden and thinks he should leak some tips to the major's base, as he would like to see how far they can investigate with just that information. That night, Tachibura was at the parking lot and was surprised by what she had in her car. Yuji's phone was there, and she reads the note indicating that. Quickly, the major makes a call telling Minami that she was going there. The protagonist overhears everything while hidden. Tachibura says it's about Wei's servant and that she had an idea. During this time, the protagonist takes the opportunity to leave the area. The major goes to see the colonel captain and says that every time a crime related to abilities happens, Ryuji is always around. Matsu asks if the man is in Tokyo at the moment, as that would be very serious. Even so, she confirms it's real. The captain asks what the basis for this conclusion is. The girl says there is only one contact registered on the phone, and its signal points to a hideout in Tokyo, where Jushima was last located. Matsu, hearing this, says that the incident happened in Fukui, and the reason was the nuclear plant, as they also found many conclusive pieces of evidence pointing to Fukui at the place where Maki was taken down, and Jushima was also believed to be in Fukui. The association was dispatching hunters for this matter, and this was their chance to catch them all at once. The major asks what the real goal of Jushima being in Tokyo was. The captain asks if she's talking about Wei. The girl responds yes. The man asks what she wanted from the old man. Tachibura says they were probably going after the prime minister again, and even if that wasn't the case, they must be planning something else, and they've taken all precautions and are monitoring their next move. Matsu tells the major that she always gets emotional when talking about this criminal, but warns her that the prime minister would be traveling abroad that night, and that it was unlikely that a man in prison could exact revenge for what happened 8 years ago, and that the minister would depart from Haneda Airport, right next to the Tendu prison where Hijikata is being held. The major says she will take full responsibility if this turns out to be a mistake on her part, and if it's what it takes to prevent a tragedy from happening. Matsu, seeing her reaction, says that she was still the same. He then asks her to gather the local police, as he was going to try to trust his instincts, but she should inform him directly when something happens. The girl thanks him for the recognition. On the outer wall of the Tendo prison, Jushima listens to his group's information. He tells his partner that the operation in Fukui has started and all the underground tunnels were marked on the map. He then tells Feng that they should go. The four-eyed man obeys the orders. He approaches the wall, and by touching it with his hand, he activates the Apocalypse Hand ability, causing a large impact, managing to break it. He knows that there will probably be a material blocker there, and that would normally mean he could only use his ability up to this point, but equipping that item would not be a problem anymore. After the explosion, the operation began. A large group of bandits joins the two and invades the place. Jushima leads the way with the map and tells everyone to stop. He then asks his partner to use his abilities. Immediately, Feng begins to accumulate mana in his hand, managing to create a hole in the ground. Using a ladder, they descend to the lower floor. Jushima is the first to exit the room, coming face to face with security guards. He attacks them, easily taking them out, and tells everyone to hurry, as the control room is right ahead. At the end of the corridor, they can hear the voices of other guards, but they are already at the door of the control room. The leader asks Feng to open the door. With a finger, he concentrates his mana and makes a hole in the door. Jushima approaches the hole and inhales, activating his mortal poison ability, causing everyone inside the room to begin losing consciousness. After a while, they open the door, and upon entering the room, Feng says they're doing well, but it might just be for now. If more come, it would be problematic. Quickly, Jushima starts messing with the controls, and by pressing a separate button, he opens the cell of their boss. Hijikata was chained, but he smiled upon seeing a group of criminals in front of him, saying they were there to take him. The criminal says that it was quite a grand parade, but he had grown tired of waiting. Meanwhile, the major was heading to the prison while talking on the phone, saying that this wasn't enough yet, and that they needed to expand the alert range and dispatch the remaining members. She was on a call with the prison agents, but it wasn't long before she lost contact, which irritated her, and she asked her assistant to drive faster. Upon arriving at the prison, they quickly try to enter and manage to locate the criminals who were defeating all the agents they encountered. Mark tells his boss that it's very dangerous to attack them. Still, seeing them in front of them, he deduces that the material blocker is still in operation. If they couldn't use their abilities, they still had a chance of winning. Feng notices the girl's movements and asks what she is doing. Tachibura starts shooting with her pistol, but the bullets are easily stopped by Four Eyes, who also manages to break them.
He starts laughing, asking if she didn't have any questions, as the Hunter Control Unit's greetings were quite extreme. The Major is stunned and wonders how that guy was using his abilities, even with the blocker active. Feng replies that they were originally just public servants with big heads, thinking they wouldn't be prepared. That's when Tachibura realizes that the bracelet has the effect of blocking the blocker. Jushima tells his boss that a troublesome girl got involved. He asks if she's talking about the Major. Upon confirming, he turns around and asks if she's there to celebrate his dismissal. The girl says that it's enough of his absurdity and asks to return to his solitary confinement, as she knew he was aiming for the Prime Minister again. The criminal, hearing this, says that she was as enthusiastic as always. However, nothing would change just because he was there, but he had no plans to fight to a deadlock because today was the day he would lose his life. He then starts walking, saying he would leave, as the airport people were strict about punctuality. Immediately, some guards appear and start shooting at the criminals, but Feng uses his ability to block the shots, while Jushima activates his poison ability, launching it at the guards, forcing them to flee. The Major even tries to go after Hijikata, but she's stopped by Feng, who steps in front of her and says that if she wanted someone to play with, he was there. He then grabs Tachibura's tie and tries to use his skill, but Mark starts shooting. Four Eyes begins to defend himself and asks if they just wanted to beat him. He then stops the shots with his hand and says that this was all there was in the Hunter Control Unit and that it was ridiculous, so he would turn them to dust. After saying that, he charges at the Major, ready to strike her with his Apocalypse Palm. But suddenly, the criminal's arm is cut off. He is thrown away. Tachibura is shocked by this, but the protagonist places his hand on her shoulder and says that now it's just the two of them left. The girl asks if he's an awakened one. Sho replies that it's been a while, but it's not long before Feng starts using his mana on the wound, asking if he was with the Hunter Control Unit. He then laughs, saying that he could even use his abilities and that it was different. He liked his courage. The protagonist, hearing all this, states that they were just weaklings who did nothing but chatter and were the same everywhere in the world. Feng charges at him, asking why he was laughing. Sho manages to dodge and quickly counterattacks. The bandit blocks with a shield, surprising the protagonist by momentarily canceling his mana barrier. But Sho dodges, thinking that was a useless trick, and is stunned by that movement. The protagonist lands a strike on his chest. Defeating him in one blow, his level increases, and he gains a new ability. He then says that the next one can come closer. Jushima starts asking how he managed to do that under the effect of the blocker. The protagonist starts concentrating mana in his sword and begins speaking, saying that there was no end to this, but it was clear that he had to pay for his sins. Hearing Sho's voice, Jushima says he had heard him before when he talked with Maki's phone, and then gets angry about what happened and starts activating his abilities, saying that since he, the protagonist, took down Maki, he wouldn't let him have an easy defeat. Sho says that he didn't expect him to lament for a comrade, which was unexpected from him, and that he should stop wasting time and come to him. The criminal starts attacking by throwing poison balls, preventing the protagonist from advancing. But he, seeing the attack, says that compared to Aoki's lightning rain, this is a piece of cake. Even though he knows that each attack is enough to take anyone down instantly, it would be problematic if he were hit, so he decides to end this fight quickly by increasing his mana from 70 to 90. Jushima continues attacking, and the protagonist dodges, managing to close the distance and land an attack, causing Jushima to lose his balance. Then, with a downward strike, he splits the criminal in half without him even reacting. After defeating that guy, his level increases. The Major, witnessing all of this, finds it impossible, even though he's not within the range of the blocker, and he can move like this with just pure swordsmanship and no abilities. She asks if they had met in a rank E dungeon before but didn't know his name. The protagonist introduces himself. Tachibura says this area is restricted for civilians, so she wants to know how he got here, especially since it looks like he predicted the perfect moment. Sho asks what she's trying to say to someone who owes her life. Besides that, he didn't think she had the luxury to worry about this right now.
Then he asks if there's another person, as he remembers passing by him for a moment, but instantly knew. There's not much mana smell left on him. He's probably the most powerful person he's met in this world so far, and somehow everything has gone according to his predictions up until now, so he wants to know if there's any backup capable of handling it. Meanwhile, at Haneda Airport, there was chaos. Hijikata was destroying everything in his path. The military was trying to stop him but couldn't, and they start deducing that he must be an S-rank hunter. The soldiers say that the chartered plane hadn't taken off yet, so they decide to contact the association and request reinforcements. Soon, they return to shooting at the criminal, who, using his fire ability, stops the bullets, causing the ammunition to melt. Even so, a group of soldiers rushes in and stands in front of Hijikata. He says that these people never learn and starts attacking, telling them to melt until they lose their lives. Fireballs are launched, causing massive destruction, easily defeating the soldiers, turning them to ashes. The ground is cracking from the heat, but Hijikata realizes there's a hunter behind him. He then attacks suddenly, grabbing his face, saying he couldn't believe it. After saying this, he slams the man's head into the ground. As the man turns to dust, the criminal asks who his instructor was, and after defeating him, he states that he couldn't find the politician, so he was using flesh shields and playing hide-and-seek. He adds that the prison is a really sad place, a perfect environment for researching abilities. He possesses the abilities: Super Enhancement, Fierce Splash, Mana Explosion, Fireworks Festival, Overlap, Fireball, Super Slam, along with a new ability that had been added. Hijikata activates his skill, Fire Incarnation, creating a massive fire intensity in his hand, recognizing this skill as worthy of an instructor. Meanwhile, the Major accelerates the car as fast as she can. She says she will take command as soon as she arrives, and even though she recognizes the protagonist's powers, Hijikata's level is very different. Despite hearing this, Sho says there's no need to say that, as he had already planned to take action first, but Tachibura says that his face was saying otherwise, since she knew all the ACE members were in Fukui at that moment, so she couldn't be demanding about who she was bringing, as she had proven his ability and could trust him. But she thinks that finally, she will put an end to this. Upon arriving at the airport and seeing all the destruction, the protagonist asks the Major what all this was, and she responds that this was the show Hijikata puts on, and tells Mark that she will suppress the criminal alone while he attends to the wounded. The protagonist knows that this guy used to be an instructor at the Hunter Control Unit in the past, but regardless of who he is now, he fits the criteria for his executioner ability. The girl says that they are in an emergency and she has no interest in investigating him, but she also can't guarantee his safety, so he should protect his own life, as she doesn't care how talented he is. He shouldn't do anything reckless. The protagonist listens quietly. The Major continues, saying that this is a life-or-death battle, and so he should understand the limits. Shu thanks her for the advice and says he will keep it in his heart. A plane was still intact in the middle of all the broken ground. Hijikata, still taking people down. After finding the minister, says that he's been waiting for him. Yoshimura is surprised to see him. The criminal says that he spent 8 years trying to calm down, but unfortunately, he only came to one conclusion. He couldn't stand taking orders from someone like him who had no abilities. But before he could grab the minister, Tachibura appears, catching Hijikata's attention. He turns around and says he had warned so many times, yet he still showed up. She responds that she could say the same about his instructor, and had told him to stay in the cage, but he still crossed the line. The criminal says he could feel the passage of time and that she had grown a lot. The major tells him to stop talking nonsense and surrender. Hijikata says surrendering is foolish, and then goes for the attack, aiming to finish off the minister. But suddenly, a sword passes right in front of him, and Sho appears, stopping the attack. He asks the criminal to wait a moment, then helps Yoshimura, who's thanking him, to get up. The protagonist asks if he's injured and says they need to escape. The criminal, irritated, asks the protagonist who he is. Sho responds that he's already said there's no need to reveal his name. Hijikata begins activating his fire abilities and attacks the protagonist, who, holding the minister, starts running, saying he will look for a safe place. The criminal gets ready to run, saying that no one would escape. At this moment, the major appears in front of him, saying that it's a pity, as it seemed like he failed 50% of his objective. He continues attacking, saying he's wrong because he succeeded in 50%, and everything will end when he defeats them all. The girl, not intimidated, faces her former instructor, using her gauntlet to try and land a punch, but he holds her hand, leaving her shocked. Hijikata begins using the flames on her hand, asking if she can survive this, and then attacks, throwing her away after hitting her stomach, which uses super regeneration. The criminal, seeing this, says she's basically letting her flesh be cut. The girl attacks, moving behind Hijikata, who asks if she's trying to break his bones. He then counters, calling her naive, quickly grabbing her by the neck, using his other hand to activate the flames and deliver several attacks, throwing her away and leaving her seriously injured. The protagonist starts moving closer to Tachibura. Hijikata watches everything. When he gets close, the girl tells him not to stop, even though he's no match for the monster. Sho tells the major that she's tried her best, and asks her not to force herself, saying she should just observe. Quickly, the protagonist increases his mana to 110, and says she will understand her limits and reach her full potential. Hijikata says it's great to have gotten out of prison, but it seems many different people showed up to greet him, without considering that he had no obligation to be their opponent. He then begins walking, telling the protagonist to stay still since he has no interest in cutting talent at the root. Even so, the protagonist attacks him with his sword and says he's welcome to pass by him if he wants, as he will do what he wants. The criminal is not happy with this response. Sho charges forward but wonders if he can withstand the attacks. Hijikata prepares to catch the protagonist, who manages to dodge the attack and counterattacks quickly with the mortal poison skill. The criminal manages to defend with a barrier and, creating a fire sword, tries to attack the protagonist again, but Sho jumps to dodge. The man says he can see why Tachibura had so much confidence in him, but at the same time, he can see his weakness. Still, Sho charges forward in the midst of all those attacks, which causes massive destruction as they collide with the ground. Hijikata begins laughing, thinking he's at an advantage, but the protagonist is still in front of him. The criminal says that mana is something similar to basic physical ability. In a fight between hunters, mana serves as the base, that difference between them. Sho says he heard that he was a former instructor, but his lectures were so boring that no one could stand to listen, and that he's a bit old with a decent mana reserve, and because of that, it wasn't worth bragging. The man asks the protagonist to repeat that. Sho begins saying that if he wants to fight, he can simply return to prison. Sho knows that the difference in mana between them is clear, and right now, his opponent is stronger, and understanding this fact, he's trying to make the battle last longer. Hijikata activates his skill, Super Enchantment, blocking the protagonist's attack, who says he's insinuating that he has no interest in attacking him. The criminal responds that if he really wanted to, he would have started attacking with several explosive fireballs, forcing the protagonist to retreat, yet still says that Hijikata is interesting, but admits that if this continues, it won't end anytime soon.
The protagonist then jumps with the intention of increasing the distance. The criminal, seeing this, says that he couldn't escape. He then starts to launch attacks to catch him. And as he gets closer, he makes Sho realize that he wouldn't easily gain distance, and that he was just playing around. Therefore, he jumps again, trying to get behind Hijikata, who laughs and says that now it was a game of tag. The protagonist starts running again. After getting some distance and seeing that his opponent was approaching, he states that it was the same as last time. He always tries to reduce the distance by using his body to propel himself forward. Therefore, he admits that he only had one chance. He then had to channel all his mana into that attack. The bandit was getting closer, breaking the ground with his abilities, and saying that now that the protagonist had closed his eye, he would turn to ashes. But, in reality, Sho was focused and prepared to use his opponent's habit to attack without thinking twice and hit his head. Hijikata says that such strength was a blessing, and yet he used it for those inferior beings. Therefore, it was a pity. But unexpectedly, his head is ripped off by the protagonist with a single blow, leaving him stunned after the fight. The force of the strike was so strong that the sword broke and its parts were scattered. The criminal was now defeated. Sho starts to feel something strange in his body until he receives the message that he leveled up, gaining another ability. This causes him to fall to the ground, as he was not expecting it. A few minutes ago, when Hijikata was defeated, having his head decapitated, two children who had been watching the fight were both impressed and scared after hearing that unchosen people were doomed to end there. Suzu says it seemed she shouldn't have told everything, while Miku says maybe she should have, but that one was useless, and they would need to filter out the useless ones. But the girl says they needed to consider the protagonist as they didn't know it was him. However, she observed that he was weak but correct, with refined mana. Soon the children hold hands saying they need to leave, as they should report all the details no matter how small. Meanwhile, in the training room, Aoki was training her lightning skill. She was controlling it better each time. The girl says she should control her lightning gently, as if it were threads. After doing this, she tests the attack again. Then she remembers the protagonist saying she could do this after trying a few times. Aoki asks if this is how she could get stronger. Her ability had great destructive power, but it was still uncontrolled. She remembers Sho saying that she didn't need him to get strong. The girl says she should concentrate all her lightning in one place to release it, but even so, she fails again. Taking a break from the training while listening to the news, it was said that reporters gathered at the incident at Haneda Airport last night. Apparently, they were trying to find the hunter who defeated Hijikata and saved the prime minister. It was reported that it was Sho who had 5 abilities at the time of his awakening. Reporter Yoshi managed to get a statement from the person himself. The reporter asked the protagonist that there were rumors that he had surpassed Aoki and wanted to know what his thoughts were. Sho laughs and says that there's no way he had surpassed the hunter, and that it was still too early. Aoki, hearing this, grips the cup she was holding. She then grabs her spear and decides to train again, focusing on shooting her lightning. On the same day, in another dimension, a woman asks what the purpose of this meeting was after saying they wouldn't have one for a while. A masked man says that the twins found a problematic individual who refined his mana and was able to use mana enchantment. The eagle, also angry, asks how many times they've been led by these words and traveled the world. Additionally, he wanted to know why the twins were there. The lion explains that he used them to test a new item and found them by chance. Still, his partner says he was passing that on. He then begins to disappear, saying that whether the individual was problematic or not, he wasn't too troublesome, and if he was so bothered by it, he could get rid of him. The dragon says it has been 50 years since then, and humans have gotten better at handling mana. They weren't the only ones who could refine it, as Hijikata was also one of them. Being the same as 11 years ago, the human who interrupted the anomaly in the rift was another coincidence. The lion, hearing this, asks if she really thought that way. Before she could answer, the eagle says it's fine as long as they could get confirmation. Since there was a lot of time, I'll take a look. The lion, surprised, asks what changed his mind. The man says it had been difficult, very peaceful in recent years, and putting that aside, what about the sword? And if what the gems saw was true, it seemed nonsensical because, in their world, it was just something for the inferior beings. Currently, Sho was getting all the attention, a newcomer who received 5 abilities at the time of his awakening. Tachibara asks the protagonist if he was creating a public image for himself. He replies that people only see what they want to see. As long as he made a good first impression, they would fill in the gaps later. After saying this, he asks if she was okay, as she seemed distracted. But he asks her to simplify her thoughts. Just consider whether it was necessary or not. The officer starts to think and says it was necessary to stop a criminal who was threatening the parents. The protagonist remains calm and asks if that was necessary. Tachibara says it was necessary for someone affiliated with the Hunter Control Unit. She shows her cell phone and asks if that was all she managed to recover, and that he had followed her to find someone connected to Maki, but they wouldn't pursue this incident. However, she would like him to connect with the Hunter Control Unit, as they would support his efforts and provide equipment. They would also offer the best directions since the creation of the unit. Despite hearing this, the protagonist thanks her for the kind words, but says that honestly the offer wasn't attractive, and people like Jushima and Tuyama would be happy with that. Tachibara asks why he was saying that. Then she starts to remember Jushima's skill, the deadly poison, and Tuyama's acidic skill, the deadly hand. They sound like the publicly declared abilities of Sho, so she asks if he could steal abilities. The protagonist says that she was very smart and that's why she should understand why he bothered explaining if he didn't want to be bait. The girl starts thinking that if this were really possible, there was a very strong hunter in front of her. The protagonist stands up and thanks her for her understanding, but he had to leave. When passing by the officer, he places his hand on her shoulder and says that he would continue looking forward to working with her. That afternoon, Sho was checking his status window. He was already at level 28. His mana was 135, and he had 25 bonus points. Other stats like strength, vigor, agility, and endurance range from 12 to 10. He says that the results of continuously consuming the soul pill were showing, and he could get stronger without relying on leveling up. His abilities were the Executioner level E, Super Enchantment level S, Soul Pill Technique, Deadly Poison level A, Death Hand level B, and Fire Incarnation level SS. Sho wonders why there was the term heretics in the Executioner skill, and that maybe there should be a reason for that. He was going to visit Agawa, who upon seeing him was surprised. The protagonist asks how she was feeling. The girl says she apparently needed to undergo a few more tests, but it seemed like she was cured of her mana allergy. Sho is impressed and asks if it was because of the anomaly in the rift. The girl says maybe yes, since she had been healing very quickly since that day. Suddenly, the protagonist opens a box, leaving the girl surprised. He says that she no longer needed those soul pills. Immediately, Igawa says she would gladly accept anything he gave her. The protagonist, seeing how she took the pills, says that her leader could see how energetic her sister was, and he would be happy. Sho asks if she needed or wanted anything else after chewing the last pill. She says that, in fact, she wanted to be a hunter. The protagonist says it was very dangerous still. She says it didn't mean she couldn't do it, since this was the world her brother dreamed of, and now she wanted to see it with her own eyes. Sho, seeing all of this, starts to deduce that something almost impossible was happening. But then he gets a call, and when he answers, Tamura says he is part of the Hunter Association and was contacting him because he had some information to share. He then asks if he had time. He says goodbye to Igawa, and while on the phone, he thinks he might be imagining things about the girl being healed. After leaving the room, Tamura starts explaining the reason for that call. A month later, Kishida was Kishidato with the protagonist, and upon seeing a news report, wonders how they were free since the beginning of the new year. The message said that the first ex-hunter could be born in Japan soon. This, if he really defeated Hijikata, who had been imprisoned for 8 years, completely bound, and the president of the association was rank A when he put him in prison, and they believed the protagonist should be rank S. Kishida asked him if he wasn't angry that they were saying those things. Sho says he was more frustrated because he was still rank C. Although he was teaching, he still thought he was charging enough. The boy responds that this was because he looked from his perspective, as his growth rate was very fast for an average hunter, and there was no one else who could improve in just a few days. The protagonist tells him not to compare himself to others, because if he did, he would never grow. This makes the boy feel awkward, but Sho asks what else he wanted to say. He says he wanted to know what the association wanted from him. The protagonist says that he was also wondering and would only know if they went. Tamura, seeing the protagonist arrive, approaches, saying it had been a while. He replies that he didn't expect to find him there. The man says he thought it would be better if someone familiar was there to welcome him. He then warns that the president was waiting. Arriving in Kenzu's office, he apologizes for making him come all the way there, but introduces himself as the president of the Japanese branch of the Hunters. The protagonist introduces himself as well, as does Kishida. Kenzu tells the boy that he had grown a lot in such a short time, and that Tori would be proud if he were still alive. Kishida, embarrassed, asks how he was. The president says he would love to talk to his friend's grandson, but since he invited the most famous rookie, he couldn't afford to do that. Sho, seeing this, asks if that was his rank. The man says yes, and that it had been raised to rank A, which had taken longer than expected. There were many voices in the association saying he was very inexperienced, but a rank A so fast was unprecedented, as even Aoki took a year to reach A. Hearing this, the protagonist says he deserved rank S and was prepared to support his statement. The president says maybe he wouldn't be satisfied with that. However, one couldn't rise to the position just with latent skill. It was a position available only for those who proved their worth, and that's why he would like to make a suggestion. Sho is interested to know what it is. Kenzu says that since the Reimara labyrinth incident, it became clear that dungeons can change abruptly. The association took this into account and adjusted their rank. This resulted in a rank change in the Aichi dungeon from rank S to rank SS, which, according to the scouting team, had all the monsters in the dungeon classified as guardians. They only came to this conclusion because weapons didn't work on them. The protagonist, hearing this, states that it means there is a core somewhere in that dungeon. This is a type of anomaly in the rift. The president continues saying that this is where Sho comes in, and that's why he wanted to know if he would like to participate in the investigation. And depending on the result, it could serve as proof of his ability. The protagonist asks if he wasn't treating him too well. Kenzu says not to try to fool him, as he had been observing him since the hunter exam and knew he would become strong. Still, Sho says it's written there that extermination teams can only be formed by guilds, and there are no limits to how many people can join. Kenzu says yes, as he forgot that part, but wanted to know if Sho was thinking about forming his own guild. The protagonist says yes, as it was a good time to do that and he would form an extermination team. The president shakes his hand, saying that Tamura would inform him about the details and therefore wishes him luck. The protagonist says he would have to thank Hijikata for that and that it wasn't every day that he could access rank S dungeons. It was time to create his own guild. Kishida asks the protagonist why he wanted to create a guild. He replies that he wanted to found one when the opportunity arose, and since the association supported it, it was a good time. The boy asks what the name would be. Sho starts to think. This was a good opportunity to attract people he had been involved with in his past life, something that was engraved in his memory. The continent Aslan, the god Edea, the sovereign. These were bad memories, but they were clearer than the good ones. So he decides that Sovereign would be the name of the newly created rank S Guild. Kishida says they had two members, Aniki and him. The protagonist asks if there was anyone else in mind. The boy says they needed a healer, as they were mandatory for dungeon raids. Sho states that they were an irreplaceable existence, and it was always good to have one. Then he says it's better to think about it later, and that there was no need to accept the extermination request. Kishida asks why. The protagonist replies that it was dangerous. Even knowing the boy had talent and would likely master the ancient dragon race's mana enchantment skill in the future, it still wasn't the right time. That's why he says they were going into an S-rank dungeon, and he couldn't promise to protect him, and if something unexpected happened, he couldn't take responsibility. Kishida, excited, says he wanted to go with him because he couldn't get stronger just by waiting, and that's why he had to keep challenging himself. The protagonist starts walking, thinking that the boy learned how to say the right words. Then he says they were going to a hunter shop since their equipment wasn't good enough. Kishida asks if he was going to buy his own as well. The protagonist replies that yes, since he was the talented tank. Aoki was standing in front of the mall waiting for Sho. She says he wasn't someone she could call whenever she wanted. He says that even saying that, she was still there, and that he thought she had her own reasons. The girl says she would tell him later, but now she wanted to know what he needed from her. The protagonist says he was invited to join the Aichi Dungeon extermination team and would really appreciate the opinion of an expert. Upon seeing the information, Aoki makes some calls. Startled, Kishida asks Sho who that person was. He tells him not to be afraid, as he knew who she was. It doesn't take long for the girl to return, calling them to go. The protagonist covers Kishida's mouth when Aoki shows her identity so the shouting wouldn't cause any problems. She says she would show them the best places with the best equipment deals. They start with the equipment. Kishida carries the bags, saying they were prepared in the equipment section. The protagonist asks the girl what weapons they should choose, as he didn't see anything particularly noteworthy. She says there were no suitable weapons for him there, but there was a shop she always went to, so it was better to go there. It doesn't take long before they arrive. Izume, the holder of technical skills, asks what their requests were for the day. Aoki says she was there to introduce those two people. Kishida, just like the protagonist, introduces themselves to the man. Upon seeing them, he says he's sorry and asks Sora to leave, as he wouldn't sell to those two. The girl starts begging Izume to sell the sword. Sho says he wouldn't choose a sword just because it was made by a blacksmith, as it had to have value on its own. And regardless of that, no matter how arrogant he was, that weapon wasn't something incredible, and he states he expected to find something exceptional. For example, that sword seemed like it would break just from holding it, but he was still selling something like that. The man becomes enraged upon hearing this. He then says that the protagonist had a lot of nerve, and if he managed to break it, he would give everything in the store. Using a finger, the protagonist starts concentrating his mana on the blade. Aoki is impressed by what she's seeing. The sword breaks into several pieces with little effort. Sho asks Izume what he had just said. He's stunned by that. But the protagonist asks if he had another complaint. Holding part of the blade, the man says he couldn't believe it. Sho says he seemed really confident in his own work, but hopes he can also fulfill his promises. The old man, hearing that, asks Sora who that guy was. She says maybe he's heard of him, since he was the one who eliminated the Guardian of the Anomaly, the rookie who defeated him with a single blow. Izume says he must really be getting old because he can't believe he didn't recognize a man of that caliber in front of him. The protagonist asks him to show the weapons and materials they could use, and he'd also like him to take care of the materials they would deliver in the future. The blacksmith thinks Sho is shameless, so he asks him to shut up and follow him. The man starts pulling a lever, saying that even though it was just a verbal promise, it was still a promise, and it was a price he had to pay for underestimating him. After saying this, he finishes pulling the lever, opening a passage to the basement. They start descending the stairs and soon arrive at an armory. Kishida is amazed by what he sees and asks if he could really take whatever he wanted. Izume answers yes, but asks him not to take anything that couldn't be used. The protagonist walking through the room says that compared to the dwarves, it's a little unsatisfactory, but that Blacksmith was still competent, until he finds a weapon that leaves him paralyzed. It was the Infernal Gray Blade, rank S. When used, it increases strength and agility by 50 points, mana by 150, and resistance by 100. The dedicated effect is the Mana Iron Wall, the optional effect is the Mana Fuel, and the constant effect is the Eternal Flame, along with an increase of 250 bonus points. Seeing this, the protagonist says it compensates for his weakness. Izume asks if he was interested in that weapon. Sho says it was a quality work. The old man begins to speak, saying that the anomaly in the SS rank rift interferes with the hell that happened 11 years ago. And that was a spectacular item, made with materials from the Guardian, something rare, and that the blade was a wild horse, just like its appearance, burning everything that approached it. It was in one of the Guardian's fragments when it was discovered. The protagonist asks why something like that was left behind. The man explains again that the Infernal Rift anomaly was concluded after much effort and numerous sacrifices. That was the general consensus, so they couldn't go back to collect any items. Anyway, there wouldn't be problems as long as they didn't light it up. And ahead, there were many other items in the back, so there was no rush. Izumi gets scared when he sees the protagonist taking the sword, saying he wanted to test the patterns of an SS rank Guardian. The blacksmith, stunned by this, asked if he wasn't listening to his story, that this weapon was not something a rookie could handle. Aoki and Kishida also became worried about the situation. The protagonist was about to test the ability he acquired after defeating Hijikata Fire Incarnation SS. He says he didn't believe the ability he acquired back then would be useful because that fire mana seemed like a living creature in addition to being very strong. Then he tells Aoki what she wanted to ask. The girl, frightened, didn't understand anything until the protagonist says that if she had been training as he taught, she should understand the posture's density and that she didn't need strength. She just needed to relax, as the trick was to keep a true flow going. And since he had recommended some good items for Kishida, he would help her. The boy was helping the old man with his new weapon, the Arachnid Thorn. Using mana, the protagonist increases the sword's power even further by concentrating. He begins to create mana threads and tells Sora to change the characteristics of her mana, similar to lightning, trying to manifest the specialties of a specific target. Combining the sword's power with his mana threads, Sho says she could go ahead, as the owner of the sword was him. Everyone was amazed by all that control, along with the insane power. The protagonist focuses all his energy back into the sword. The blacksmith could no longer speak, so impressed he was. Sho prepares and strikes to test, causing great destruction just from a test, showing the true value of the blade. The protagonist also had gained a bracelet, and upon seeing it, he says that it was apparently some high-level technological item. He then starts checking the information. The item was called the Martial Arts Master Rank SS, which makes any weapon that comes into contact with the host increase their skill based on the amount of mana. He says that his current experience awakened an ability from his past life, and this was a good thing, so he says he would take that item as well. Aoki approaches and says he had taught her a lot and didn't think just one shopping trip would be enough to reward him. The protagonist asks if she had any other information. The girl asks him to be careful with the SS rank dungeon he was about to challenge. Sho wants to know why she's saying this. Sora says there were many hunters who seemed to be antagonizing him. The dungeon was isolated from the outside world with many vicious, cruel, and vengeful hunters, as well as high-rank hunters, but her guild would also be present at the event, so just let her know if he needed help. The protagonist says he was fine alone, but admits that this was true for someone who defeated Hijikata alone. He was stepping out of line, so he says goodbye, saying he would meet her in Aichi. A few days later, the Magnus Cradle portal, the SS rank dungeons, was open, and many people were camping in front. Kushida drops the bag on the ground and says that, as expected, the atmosphere was stressful since it was an SS rank dungeon. Sho says he wouldn't have problems if he just followed him, but it still felt strange. And even for professional hunters, they would probably be excited for the SS rank. And if they were just preparing psychologically, as he had said, it would be best. Kushida notices that there were several people watching him set up the tent. The protagonist notices this too and says it seemed like Aoki's concerns had become reality, and that would be an annoyance. Sho goes to the tent where the master of the Flecha Guild and the master of the Yamabiko Guild were. He introduces himself, stating his name and that he was the master of a guild, but Yusuda and Nami don't say anything. The protagonist sits down and begins to wonder if they would treat him as invisible. Suddenly, an axe strikes the entrance. It was the master of the Titan Guild asking if everyone was here for the third squad. Sho introduces himself to Jin, who says that a guild with only 2 people doesn't exist, but that he had heard of him before. They say he's the guy who defeated Hijikata. The protagonist says he was lucky. The warrior agrees and says he had seen that man at his peak before, and even he thought his current self could win. How could an inexperienced person do that? Hearing this, the protagonist deduces that this is what it all boils down to, and says that if Jin couldn't believe it, he should confirm for himself, as it seemed like he didn't believe in his abilities. If he couldn't do it, then no one could, and that was a painful way to think. Jin gets angry upon hearing this, but Yasuda tells them both to stop, as it was almost time to clean the dungeon. Even so, the big guy firmly holds his weapon, and with his hand on the protagonist's shoulder says he would see how long that nonsense would last. Releasing his grip, Sho cleans his shirt and walks out of the tent. All the monsters in the Magnus Cradle are considered guardians. The reason for this has not been confirmed, but it's easy to guess there is a core inside the dungeon. Outside, hunters remain on alert in case something happens. After all, you never know when something like an anomaly in the rift will connect to the outside world. Uhara, the master of the Cursed Guild, says that this dungeon is completely different from the typical ones, and this time, the subjugation team was gathered to prevent danger in advance, wanting each team to deal with subjugating the areas they chose. Kushida, walking toward the portal, says they were finally entering an S-rank dungeon. Everyone enters and soon combat begins. Jin, along with his guild, starts defeating the monsters. Nami tells them to leave the big ones to the tanks and clear the smaller ones, targeting their legs with the arrows. She's also with her guild and asks them to use their abilities. The front and back lines switch positions. It doesn't take long before Jin finishes off those monsters. He tells his subordinate to move after finishing dismantling them. The protagonist says there's no opening to get in, and maybe the big guy planned not to let him have an area. Jin is always staring at Sho, who realizes he is being restricted in a place where their lives are at stake. But this shows that Jin is a small-minded man. Kushida asks the protagonist if he would be fine. He replies that there's no need to worry, it's actually the perfect level. Both are facing a massive creature. The protagonist says that soon the monsters didn't even seem to try hiding anymore. Jin appears and says it's finally time for the Sovereign to lose control, as there were only 2 of them and there was no way to avoid it. Sho starts unsheathing his sword, saying they had finished all preparations, so he should shut up and watch, deducing that there was no need to use the infernal gray blade. Kushida charges into the attack, creating a huge shock when colliding with the creature. He immediately activates his defensive posture. The protagonist, watching his partner in combat, says not to stop and follow the flow. Nami, seeing how they fought, wonders if that boy was really rank C since he had done so much on his own. The protagonist goes on the attack and strikes directly at the monster, managing to wound it and push it back. Kushida attacks again and using his spear delivers a powerful blow to the monster's body, even managing to push it. An arrow is fired, but Sho catches it in midair. He wonders what that was. Yasuda tells the protagonist that he seemed to be in trouble, so they thought they should help. The protagonist breaks the arrow, saying there was no need to help with something of that level and asks if he had ever heard of something called good manners. The archer gets angry upon hearing this, but the guildmaster stops him from doing anything. Sho continues saying that they should value their own lives, and that was something they knew. Suddenly, another monster appears behind him, and as he notices, he strikes and cuts it down with a single blow, leaving everyone stunned. The protagonist says it's better to focus on quality instead of quantity, although those who were just numbers in a herd wouldn't understand that. Jin doesn't like hearing and seeing that. Nami, on the other hand, says that the protagonist is a very advanced rookie, so he should at least have the same confidence. He then asks him to hurry with the dismantling so they can proceed. Meanwhile, the protagonist notices a presence above him that had been there for some time, and upon realizing there was another monster, he shouts for everyone to duck. The serpent descending the tower prepares to attack. It causes its body to release several stones with high destructive power, easily defeating anyone hit. Kishida realizes he is about to be struck, but before he can do anything, the protagonist steps in front and blocks the attack, managing to deflect it to the ground where the impact causes real damage. Sho says that this is insane and that they've cornered it. The Magnus effect is a phenomenon where the direction of movement doubles, due to the pressure difference that occurs when an object spins and moves through a fluid, and this dungeon, the Magnus Cradle, also received its name from the attack characteristics of its monsters. Some were being annihilated for not being careful while defending. The protagonist, seeing this, states that maybe this was why the previous exploration had been interrupted. He was managing to block the attacks with ease. He thinks to himself, the fact that I can defend against attacks of this magnitude without any magical power proves I'm slowly regaining the intuition I had in my previous life, but it's still too early to celebrate. He tells Kushida to get out of the way because it's dangerous. The boy says he understands, and the protagonist starts preparing to take down the monster before it causes more damage, accumulating mana in his sword. He easily manages to cut it down. Kushida thanks Sho for defeating the monster, but he was being held hostage by Jin, who says there are no funny ideas. That's when the protagonist realizes that he was in too much of a rush to eliminate the monsters, and it was crazy to do that with other members around. The people who were hit by the attack were going berserk, while others were saying to capture anyone having convulsions, and that everyone should tend to their wounds. Everyone was so focused on the trajectory of the attack, the additional projectile effect, and the mental attack, which was the main focus. Jin then asks if the protagonist was planning for something like this to happen from the start. Jin says it could be, but it's a coincidence, as he never imagined something like Reymara would appear in a place like this, and it was true that it was easier to handle because of him. And he just had to admit that the projectile's achievement influenced it. The big guy says it was a revelation and he had dared to make a fool of him, so he better get ready to face the consequences and hand over his weapon. Otherwise, he would send the head of the only group member flying. That was an unexpected mental attack, a battlefield where it was no longer possible to distinguish between friend and foe. The protagonist wonders if he could indeed be forgiven. However, he was neglecting one thing, and he could also use it as an excuse. He then asks if Jin thought he could fight him. Jin laughs and says he's teaching him that he was wrong. Sho says yes and that he had misunderstood the premise from the start, and he wasn't the only one who could go berserk. He tells Kushida to duck. Immediately, the boy does so, leaving the big guy confused. The protagonist seizes the opportunity and attacks, decapitating him with one blow. Now Jin was defeated. After planning to take down Sho, he levels up again, gaining a new skill. He states that his current mana is 135 and a sword with martial arts correction is 4 times stronger than a rank B item, even if it's just an iron sword. Still shocked, Kushida asks what they should do now. The protagonist starts to approach the body and using his hand strikes Jin's arm. Yusuda and Nami are stunned by this until Sho begins to speak, saying that avoiding the projectile resulted in being hit by the mental attack, and the frenzied state of an S-rank hunter is terrifying. He then asks how they think that looks. After saying this, he looks at the 2 guildmasters, wanting answers from them. Yusuda says it seems like the monster got the big guy. The girl agrees with her ally, making the protagonist happy to know. In Sora's private tent, she was studying when she realized Sho's mana was calling her. She follows it, and when she finds the protagonist, she asks what he wanted again. He wants to know if she was expecting to find him there. The girl replies yes, because he's the only one who irritates people in such a strange way. Then she asks what he needs, and if another hunter did something. The protagonist responds that this was already resolved, but the most important thing is that he wants to know what she plans to do next. Aoki says that before doing that, he could have asked if she was okay, but the protagonist replies that he could tell that by looking at her. Moreover, Squad 1 managed to return because she was fine. The girl takes a deep breath, saying that Squad 1 is no different from Squad 3. Therefore, she would join the best hunters with proven abilities, regardless of the guild, since very few managed to reach the second floor, and perhaps they would even reorganize the positions. The protagonist, hearing this, thinks that the best hunters know each other and are aware of each other's abilities, implying that this means the limit for subjugation strength is defined. Aoki says that this was typical of him and responds that she thought they were close enough to say that. Sora asks him not to unilaterally decide that they were close, as they had only met a few times, so their relationship wasn't that deep. The protagonist says he will teach the next step about how to use mana, and that's a good deal. The girl starts to move away. The protagonist tells her not to expect anything. Even though he had the authority to propose things, it's not absolute, and if it's a proposal that's not worth it, the guildmasters will probably reject it. Even so, Sho says he doesn't mind, and what matters is that it would be her recommendation. But Aoki turns around saying she didn't need flattery. The protagonist is a bit confused by that, but decides to check what he gained from defeating Araqua before returning. First, he needs to put 10 points in mana until he notices that he can't see many skills he can use. His new skill is Berserk Rank A, explained as the mental and physical aspects being inversely proportional, a skill that increases all stats except resistance, offering part of the reason. Sho says that this isn't bad but admits that he doesn't know how to use it, so the skills remain the same. The entrance to the second floor at the temporary camp. Some people are being healed from combat injuries. Kushida tells the protagonist that it seems that Squad 1, which was fighting on the second floor, was also attacked by the same monster. Sho says it's fine now and he can rest. Several hours later, Uhara says that the remaining team will protect the first floor, and the selected elite group should advance to the second floor. Kushida asks the protagonist which rope he pulled, and no matter how good he is, there's no way those people will put him on the main team. Sho says he only used the free pass, and if something happens, the boy should go to the Curse Guild because Aoki is well known, so he will be fine. After that, they part ways, and the protagonist is with Uhara when they are suddenly attacked by long-range magic. The tank manages to defend the first attacks. Soon, a member says that the projectile power is completely different from the first floors, so they should be careful. More attacks are approaching them. The group manages to defend the attacks. The protagonist notices that they were prepared and it was as if they were waiting for them. An army of monsters was in front of them, ready for combat, and it didn't take long for them to start attacking, launching magical spheres, forcing the group to retreat and defend. Daiki says those monsters are different from the ones on the first floor. These are above rank S, and the association obviously classified them wrong. Uhara, in the middle of the battle, thinks that now, since the path is one way, they can't even retreat, and even though it's a bit early, it's time to use the Unshakable Union skill, giving a buff to all the group members. Sho says that his vigor and HP have increased beyond his resistance, and this is the effect of the skill. The mages are happy with that captain's buff, as now they would be fine, even being attacked by the projectiles. Immediately, Haruto activates the mana wall, managing to stop the approaching attacks. The mage warns the warriors that they have 30 seconds until the next wave, and they respond that they will support them during the wait. Two members of the group are infused with frenzy, but they are already being healed. The protagonist, seeing this, recognizes that high-ranking hunters have perfect teamwork and communication skills. Suddenly, a monster appears behind them, but Sho easily destroys it, admitting that since their long-range attacks were countered, they seem to be changing their strategies, so it's time to play with them. He starts defeating them more easily than before, and standing in front of a monster begins to dodge its attacks, then counterattacks, activating the deadly poison skill upon hitting it, causing the creature to be defeated slowly. Another monster approaches from behind, but using the skill Mortal Hand, Sho manages to stop and defeat it. People are stunned watching the protagonist fight, as they had thought he was only there because of his connection to Aoki. But now, seeing him fight the monsters alone, it showed that it wasn't just a matter of talent anymore. It didn't take long for the last monster to be defeated, and they began to proceed to the third floor after clearing the area. Sora approaches, saying that the protagonist proved her recommendation was justified. He replies that it's just the payment for the free pass which leaves the girl speechless. Then Uhara approaches her, saying that it was as expected from someone who recommended him. He agrees, saying that the second floor seemed much narrower compared to the first floor. The man responds that yes, and adds that it could be more like a narrower pyramid. The girl says that they could complete the invasion faster than expected. Uhara asks her not to let her guard down as a trap could be revealed. Suddenly, the place starts shaking, leaving everyone startled, not knowing what was happening. And some even deduced it could be a prelude to the anomaly in the rift. The captain orders everyone to quickly go to the third floor. Aoki starts climbing the stairs but notices the protagonist is standing still. She becomes worried upon seeing this, but he says he will be there soon. Then, he turns back to where the monsters were, sits down, and soon tells everyone to hurry as he was reaching his limit with his patience. The eagle, immediately surprised by being noticed, admits that Sho has magnificent observational skills. The protagonist asks who he is, as he has been observing them since they arrived on the second floor. The man is even more surprised that he had been noticed from the start and starts applauding, saying that he was incredible and that he hadn't noticed before, but he seemed capable of using mana enchantment. Sho, realizing this, admits that, unlike Kushida, this guy seemed proficient in it. The eagle continues, saying that, however, he was still far from perfect, and the reason didn't seem to come from a low level. He asks who taught him, but the protagonist asks if he thought he would give him an answer. The man begins using his mana, saying he understands it in another way. The protagonist watches and states that it's a crushing mana shockwave, far beyond Hijikata's level. The eagle says he is glad to see his opponent isn't docile because it would have been boring otherwise. Sho prepares and asks if that was the definition of interesting. The man says it's a good question, and that something like that attack will answer it. The magic had great destructive power, and the eagle, furious, says that mana enchantment belongs to them, and he won't forgive others for using it. The protagonist asks if that's how he got rid of the others. The man says he will leave that to his imagination, and regardless, he will take him down, and it's a pity he has to face him. Sho, seeing those mana-made wings, admits that these abilities are characteristics of the eared races and fairies, which strengthens his conviction that this man has something to do with his past life, and now that he's found a clue, he can't let him go. He then prepares for combat with the infernal blade. The eagle prepares to attack again, saying that it doesn't make sense to try to look cool. Several attacks are launched against the protagonist, but he manages to dodge those explosions, going into a counterattack. The masked man says that this is like an attack from a plebeian like him, who only knows how to swing a sword. Even missing his attack, Sho manages to break the stone where the man was. The eagle attacks again, telling the protagonist to try harder, as it would be boring to end it like that. He then casts his magic again. The protagonist manages to dodge, thinking that now he has a general understanding of his attack patterns, it's time to end this, and activates Berserk, causing his mana of 145 to combine with the Infernal Blade's 150 and Berserk's 50, totaling 345. Sho is about to strike again. As he gets close to hitting the eagle, who manages to dodge the powerful blow, the protagonist realizes that the bombarding and the wings are a mixture of Siesta from the Eared race and Talon from the fairies, and that is something terrifying. The masked man attacks again, telling the protagonist not to smile. He dodges the attack again. The eagle realizes that his opponent has the skills to face his attacks, but prepares for another strike. Sho admits that he should use the countermeasure against that attack. The 8 races have their own exclusive method of mana enchantment, and the fairy race made Talon, the Eared race made 10 siestas, and the ancient dragon race had racial. The 8 races share their vision through their mana enchantment methods to complete a skill that would allow them to fight against the sovereign's invasion. This is the peak and backbone of mana enchantment, and that's why they say that before, he wouldn't have been able to use the power of his past life in this world. However, with the mana he has regained, he could revive it. He then activates Exceed, concentrating his mana, making him even more powerful. The eagle says he will trigger the final mana bombardment, the laser. The place starts to crumble with that attack, but the protagonist dodges it with little difficulty. The man, seeing this, creates a magical barrier, defending himself from Sho's attack, who says that was the wrong answer, as he should have dodged instead of defending. The masked man asks what he just said, but before he can react, the protagonist's blade shatters the barrier, causing massive destruction. Sho manages to hit his opponent, even though it leaves him wounded. He approaches the man lying on the ground and says that they can finally talk. The eagle asks what happened, since mana enchantment belongs to them. The protagonist cuts off the man's arm and tells him to shut up, saying that he would ask the questions, and first he wanted to know his name. But if he wanted to be killed while suffering, he would grant that wish. The eagle immediately asks him to wait and says his name is Kadia. Sho says he's never heard that name in his past life, and so he thinks of forcing the information out. He then asks what his goal is, but to start with, wants to know how he learned the enchantment. The man takes a while to respond. The protagonist, then preparing to strike, asks if he can't hear him, but seeing this, deduces that he might be committed to the promise of not leaking important secrets. So he asks if Kadia knows the words Aslan, Edea, and Sovereign. Kadia is surprised to hear this. Sho notes that even when that guy used the mana enchantment of the Eared race and the fairies, he didn't know about them, so he decides to move on to the next question and now wants to know how he found out he would be there. Kadia responds that he didn't know and was just there with another guy who wanted to test his abilities. The protagonist wants to know who this other guy is, but he realizes there's another restriction. He then places his sword on the eagle's neck, saying it's a disappointment. The man begins to ask if he would really kill him, saying that he understood that he should speak with his group to join them. The protagonist says he doesn't know what his motives are, but he's not going to join a group of assassins. Kadia becomes enraged upon hearing this, but warns Sho not to get cocky for defeating him, as there are monsters above his level, and he would be avenged if killed. Despite hearing this, Sho says they wouldn't be able to defeat him, because if they knew who he was, they wouldn't even think about getting close. This leaves the eagle wondering who he is, but the protagonist decapitates him in response. Immediately, his level increases, gaining a new skill, mana bombardment. Sho says that this was his only reward, but he thought that man knew something. Updating the information, he notices that the executioner skill has leveled up to EX. He knew that the highest rank recorded by the association was rank SS, and maybe if the skill's rank exceeded that, it might not be displayed correctly. The protagonist realizes that this is an update in the skill information, meaning it was already at EX when he first received it, and this might have something to do with his past life. Then he notices something strange happening when he reaches the 3rd floor. Kushida says that if the alarm on the 1st floor went off, it must mean the anomaly in the rift. The protagonist, seeing how the boy was, tells him to calm down and asks where Aoki is. The tank points out that the girl is in the middle of that chaos. Sho, seeing that, says it looks like the boss of the 3rd floor came from the rift anomaly. Several monsters are charging at the group. The protagonist starts walking and tells Kushida that he will leave those mobs to him, as, along with the Curse Guild, they should be able to handle the creatures. The boy asks where he is going, and Sho says he's going after the boss. Several attacks begin coming from behind the mountain. The group starts to get worried as they don't know how to stop something like that, as it's on the level of a natural catastrophe.